The doorbell rang, and Valeria, shaking her head, smiled. Her daughter had forgotten her keys again. What if she had to work late today? After all, the quarterly report was just around the corner. Fortunately, today, she had decided to put aside all her calculations to relieve her guilty conscience and, under the disapproving gaze of her director, simply go home. "Sorry, Mom, I forgot my keys again," Dana said, not giving her a chance for a lecture. She quickly lowered her head, turned around, and started to take off her shoes without looking up from the floor. "Dana, is something wrong? Did someone upset you? I can see that you're not feeling well," Valeria asked cautiously, suspecting that her daughter might have had another disagreement with her friend or received an undeserved bad grade from her teacher, as usual. What else could upset a child at the age of 15 so much? "I don't even know how to say it," Dana replied, her voice tinged with resentment towards the whole world, full of worries. Her lips trembled as she struggled to hold back tears that were ready to burst from her eyes. A chill ran down Valeria's spine from her daughter's gloomy mood. Suddenly, she had a foreboding of impending trouble. Dana hadn't said anything bad yet. She just looked guilty, as if she was struggling with the decision of whether to confide in her mother or not. But Valeria had already let her mind wander to dark thoughts. "We met Michael in the school cafeteria. We agreed that I'd go to his place after English class. He'll give me my flash drive and help me install a program on my phone," Dana stammered. She hesitated and swallowed hard, as if something was preventing her from speaking. She coughed several times. "Tell me, did Michael bother you? Don't stay silent. I'll call Aunt Angelina right now. He won't get away with this. I've told you 1,000 times not to get involved with a guy 2 years older than you. What kind of friendship can you have with him? He has completely different intentions." She abruptly grabbed her daughter's shoulder and, with her free hand, lifted her chin to make her look directly into her eyes. Her hands itched to grab her phone and call Michael, immediately demanding an explanation. "No, Mom. Michael had nothing to do with it. He wasn't even at home. Aunt Angelina opened the door for me. She seemed disheveled and worried. I asked her for permission to come in and get my flash drive. She didn't allow me to." Dana hesitated again, as if she couldn't decide whether to reveal what happened next. "Thank God." Valeria exhaled with relief. Her daughter had already come up with many horrible scenarios in her stressed mind. She tried to smile. Yes, she had quite the imagination. Sometimes the mind played tricks. "Then I saw Dad's shoes in the hallway. Mom, they are lovers." Valeria held her breath in surprise and sank onto a puff. Where were these conclusions coming from? So what if she saw shoes like her father's? Angelina was a single woman. Perhaps she was dating a man whose shoes were exactly the same as Desmond's. "I saw Dad in the mirror. He was shirtless and hiding from me. I couldn't have been mistaken. It was definitely him. I didn't want to tell you, but I couldn't help it." Pouting, her daughter turned away and wiped away a tear with trembling hands. After a brief pause, she sat down on the puff next to her mother, placing her head on her shoulder. She froze in a frightened manner, then sniffled as if feeling guilty, wiping her nose with her hand. They had met Angelina many years ago. They used to hang out together with their kids at the playground. At first, they lived in the same building. Later, Angelina separated from her husband. Charles had moved to the outskirts of the city, while Angelina had bought a flat in the neighboring courtyard. Valeria's heart pounded out of her chest. She accepted her daughter's arguments without hesitation, but she didn't want to take them at face value. Had Desmond been lying so skillfully all this time, pretending, trying to convince everyone around that he was a perfectly happy and content person? The front door opened, and her husband appeared at the threshold. Trying her best to appear as if nothing had happened, Valeria forced a strained smile. Desmond glanced at his daughter, raised his eyebrows in surprise, then turned his gaze to Valeria. "Waiting for me?" he asked as he began to remove his shoes without acknowledging the tension. He carefully placed them by the door and left his keys on a shelf. He looked in the mirror and ran a hand through his hair. "I thought you'd be working late today. I didn't hurry home. Stopped by the gas station on the way, then went to the tire shop. Got a flat tire repaired." He glanced at Dana briefly, and for a moment, it seemed like he was taken aback, but he quickly regained his composure. Valeria was about to open her mouth to ask an insinuating question, but her daughter beat her to it. "Dad, why aren't you mentioning that you were at Aunt Angelina's? Don't deny it. I saw you in the mirror. You didn't hide well." Smirking, Desmond shrugged, as if nothing serious had happened. He was entirely blameless and saw no reason to be burdened with non-existent sins. "I told you I stopped by the tire shop to fix a flat tire. You know it's just around the corner from her house." I was going to explain, but you interrupted me. "Yes, I won't deny it. I visited Angelina. She was passing by with a heavy bag. I offered to help. Why not? Angelina offered me a glass of cherry juice. I didn't refuse. I accidentally spilled some on my shirt. I went to the bathroom to wash it off, but I couldn't get the stain out. Angelina suggested I take it off, and she washed the stain herself. For authenticity, he unbuttoned a button on his jacket, and indeed, his shirt was still damp. What did you think? Did you seriously not trust your own father?" he asked. He spoke so convincingly that even Dana began to doubt her assumptions. Her daughter was embarrassed and felt a little ashamed of her earlier suspicions. Desmond took his daughter by the shoulders and looked closely at her still skeptical face, as if silently pleading for her to take back her words and not to cause a rift between her parents. He was prepared to hear an apology, but what he heard was unexpected. "I recently saw our car in their driveway. I just didn't think much of it at the time. But today, and Angelina acted way too strange, and so did you." Dana expressed her doubts and observed her father's reaction closely, as if shouting that she didn't believe a word of what he said. Doubts didn't retreat, and it was impossible to focus on anything else. Valeria felt like the walls were closing in from her daughter's words, and it was just a matter of time before the ceiling collapsed. She was caught in a loop of confusion and didn't know how to proceed. She extended her hand. "Give me your phone," she said, never having delved into her husband's pockets, checked his phone, or asked for his email password. She believed there was no need to hide anything from each other. "Why? I think I've explained everything. I helped a woman. I didn't commit any crimes," he said, sighing heavily, looking displeased at his daughter. Valeria couldn't help but notice his uneasiness, which she found unsettling and hurtful to her pride. "Okay, then dial Angelina's number on your phone and put it on speaker. After that, I'll check your phone. If I find nothing, I'll apologize and we'll never bring up this topic again." Desmond handed her his phone. "Here you go. I have nothing to hide. Honestly, this is absurd. You've driven me crazy with your suspicions." Stunned by her daughter's words and feeling her face flush, Valeria bowed her head and took the phone in her hand. After carefully checking and finding no suspicious messages, she began to regain her composure. "Smart people clean up everything right away to avoid misunderstandings," her daughter thoughtfully remarked. Valeria felt a bit karma. She suddenly wanted to return the phone to her husband, put an end to this humiliating interrogation, and avoid calling Angelina. However, she couldn't overcome the existing distrust and transition to forgiveness. Giving in meant not believing her daughter, letting things go without addressing them, losing self-respect, and ultimately making things worse. "Go ahead, make the call. Prove to us that we're wrong, and take away our suspicions. Trust me, it's not easy for us either," she tried to motivate herself, mentally ordering herself not to relax. Desmond hesitated, unsure of what to say to Angelina. He had never called her before, and the situation was quite awkward. "Girls, my beloved daughters, can't you just believe me? I swear I won't go there again, even if Angelina asks for help with a bag of potatoes. Do you want me to delete her number from my contacts right now?" he asked his daughter, who still looked uncertain. Dana was confused and still glanced at her father with skepticism. She seemed to reproach herself for starting this whirlwind, making everything worse for everyone. But she couldn't back down from her accusations. "Dad, why do you need her phone? Where did you get it from?" she asked. "From the time when we lived next door. I never hid it from Mom. I can't even remember when I saved it," Desmond replied, reddening with indignation. It seemed that he was just a step away from giving up on everything, slamming the door, and leaving. "Make the call," Valeria urged, and she pressed the call button, putting it on speakerphone. "Desmond, what's happened?" Angelina answered. "Valeria, I wanted to thank you for washing the stain on my shirt," Desmond said, the first thing that came to his mind. "Feel free to ask for help anytime," Angelina playfully continued, as if she understood they were not alone. Without a second thought, She supported and simultaneously steered the conversation in a completely different direction. At this point, Desmond couldn't hold back any longer. He began to justify himself, complain about not being trusted, and accuse them of unfounded suspicions. He had to call to convince his wife that there was nothing between them and could never be. He gestured with his hands, made a sour expression, and asked for confirmation of the truth of his words. Ending the call, Desmond looked at everyone as if to say, "Enough is enough. If you don't stop, nothing good will come of this." Valeria chuckled. "Let's have dinner. Time will sort everything out in the end." Desmond let out a sigh of relief and removed his jacket. He tossed his shirt into the laundry basket and quietly changed into his casual clothes. With surprise, he watched as his daughter walked past him into her room, carrying a sandwich and a hot cup of tea. "The soup's in the fridge. Please heat it up for yourself," Valeria said, avoiding eye contact. She didn't know how to behave in this situation, demonstratively ignoring her husband and not wanting to sit at the same table with him. She entered her daughter's room and closed the door behind her. "Mom, do you believe him?" Dana asked in a hushed voice. The sandwich lay untouched on the table. The child had lost her appetite amidst all this chaos and worry. Valeria shook her head in silence. "No, I'm leaning more towards your virgin, but I don't want to jump to conclusions hastily. Understand me correctly. We may be wrong, and your dad might be entirely innocent," Valeria replied and fell silent. It made no sense to file for divorce based on speculations alone. There was no concrete evidence. "Maybe." Dana sighed heavily and reluctantly agreed. Desmond, feeling like he was under constant scrutiny, tried not to linger anywhere. He stayed connected all the time and even gave up his fishing trips, which puzzled his friends. Life seemed to be getting back on track, and harmony returned to their family. No one accused anyone else anymore. However, this period of calm didn't last long. While helping her grandmother tidy up the house, Dana stumbled upon an album of old photographs. As she flipped through the pages, she began to ask questions. "Who's this? And this one? Oh, is that Dad? I've never seen this picture before. Who is he with?" Dana pulled out a photo and read aloud the inscription written on the back many years ago. "I hope we'll always be together, Angelina." "Ah, that's Dad's ex-fiancée. Before he met your mom, he was dating someone else. Then they broke up." Her grandmother Jennifer grimaced, unaware of the recent events. "Well, to be precise, she left him. She found herself a richer fiancé and married a professor's son. Oh, your dad grieved for a long time, but then he fell in love with your mom." Jennifer picked up the photograph, gently placed it back into the album, turned the page, and stopped at a picture where Desmond was holding a very young Dana in his arms. She started telling stories, jogging her memory and reminiscing, laughing, but Dana was no longer interested in the conversation. An old, faded photo occupied her thoughts, where her father lovingly embraced a much younger Aunt Angelina. "Grandma, why haven't I seen this picture before? I would have recognized Aunt Angelina right away. By the way, she hasn't changed much." Dana interrupted the conversation. "I found her in a history encyclopedia recently," Dana said, wiping a shelf and accidentally causing it to fall out. "Your dad, when he split up with Angelina, tore up and threw away all the photos of them, but this one miraculously survived. So, I tucked it into the album," she added, looking mysteriously at her granddaughter and rubbing her temples. Valeria remembered how Desmond had been unhappy with the apartment they bought, complaining that Angelina's husband lived in the same building. Still, Valeria had convinced him it was a good option. Angelina and Valeria became friends and often went out together with their children. Desmond had been deeply troubled for a while, returning home in silence, and they couldn't reach him. But gradually, it had all settled down. "Don't pay attention to it, Dana. It was so long ago. Desmond loves you all very much and would never allow anything extra." "I know, my son," she reassured Dana, who tried to force a smile, remembering her grandmother's words that she'd always support her future daughter-in-law and take her side in any dispute to prevent the worst from happening. Dana had done just the opposite. In all arguments, she sided with her son. Even if her husband was wrong, she always justified him with compelling arguments, trying to clear his name. "Granny, I'm getting hungry. How about we have some tea?" Dana tried to change the subject so that her grandmother wouldn't become suspicious or defend her father. Paul, hey, can you help me? But it has to stay completely confidential. Her classmate, Paul, known to everyone as a hacker, was famous for being able to crack any program. The whole school knew that he could easily hack into anyone's phone. I need to get the call history from someone's mobile phone and track their messages. Can you do that for me? If it's about Michael, then no. What does Michael have to do with this? I don't care about his personal life. We're just friends, you know. Dana hesitated. She didn't want to involve Paul in her family problems, but she had no other choice. My mom suspects that my dad is cheating on her. Can you help me? I feel really sorry for my mom. She's not showing it, but I can tell she's really upset. Paul thought for a moment. He had always liked Dana. She never behaved rudely, and she had helped him cheat on homework a few times during breaks. Give me the number. I'll bring you the printout tomorrow. Just don't tell anyone. Mom. This is a printout of the call history and SMS messages from Dad's phone for the last 2 months. Just don't ask me where I got it. I have my sources. You don't need to know about it. Dana placed several folded sheets of paper on the table, lowering her gaze as if apologizing for intruding into something she wasn't asked to be involved in. She coughed several times, as if her throat had suddenly seized up, and she cleared it. Then, she potted her hair bun and continued. We had a phone call with Aunt Angelina the next day. They texted back and forth. Dad thanked her for her quick thinking and not letting him down. Aunt Angelina invited him over again to finish what they had started, but Dad wrote that he had experienced a temporary lapse and it wouldn't happen again. Angelina called him a few times after that, but Dad stopped answering her calls and eventually blocked her. Seeing how engrossed her mother was in reading the messages, Dana decided to fill in all the details. She had kept silent for 2 days, but now she was eager to share. By accident, I saw a photo of Aunt Angelina when she was very young at Grandma's. She and Dad were in a close embrace. It turns out that they were in love before he met you. But then Aunt Angelina broke up with Dad and got married. Valeria set the pages aside and sat across from her daughter. She looked at Dana with her eyes wide open, hardly blinking. She seemed oblivious, lost in thought, trying to figure out the best course of action. Then, Valeria stood up and, without saying a word, walked into the bedroom to get dressed. Mom, where are you going? Dana asked, her voice full of concern. Valeria thought that, in her current state, she couldn't just let her go. She had to convince her to stay and talk, to resolve everything. Desmond would come home soon, and they would show him the printout of messages. Before I show your dad the printout, I need to talk to the woman who's been plotting behind my back. I hope she has something to tell me. After that, relying on facts, I'll talk to your dad. Valeria could see how much her daughter was suffering, but she was holding up much better than she expected. All this turmoil and infidelity drama had become too much. It was time to put a final period instead of endless commas and never return to this topic. Good evening, Angelina. Will you let me in? I'm sure we have some things to discuss. Pushing aside her former neighbor, Valeria firmly stepped over the threshold. She quietly closed the door in complete silence and took off her shoes. Would you treat me to some cherry juice? Or is that honor reserved only for my husband? I wonder if you'd wash my blouse too if I accidentally spilled something on it. The first love didn't challenge her husband. Angelina pointed in the direction of the kitchen. Valeria felt utterly repulsive. She was entirely convinced that there was a connection between them, but she desperately tried to uncover the truth, searching for any evidence that her husband did love her and was not guilty of infidelity. Why can't you calm down? Why did you even think there could be something between us? Though, well, Angelina turned on the coffee machine, inserted a capsule, and brewed the coffee in complete silence. Then, she sat down opposite Valeria. Letting out a deep sigh, she began to speak. I'm sure Desmond still loves me. I was the one who left him and got married. I thought I'd be happy, but Charles started to cheat on me, and then we got divorced. You know this story. Everything happened right before your eyes. After taking a sip of coffee, she smiled, as if contemplating whether to share something crucial or to remain silent. On the day Dana saw us, he actually came to visit by himself. Before that, he would occasionally show up. I'd come home from work, and I'd see his car parked outside. He'd drop by and announce. He'd say he accidentally found some old photo, and nostalgia hit him hard. He stood by the door for a while, thinking that I would take pity on him and invite him in. But I was busy at the time, and our place was a mess, so I politely turned him down. But then, I saw him coming over again, grabbed a bag, and stormed into our apartment without asking. He locked the door behind him. He started flirting, and then if it weren't for Dana, things might have progressed. He asked me not to open the door, but for some reason, I thought it was Michael returning home and didn't listen to him. I opened the door. Valeria chuckled. Oh, how scared he was. You should have seen it. At first, he was pacing around the apartment, trying to come up with a believable story. Then he ran home. He didn't even say goodbye. Out of fear, he blocked my number. I wanted to call you and tell you everything, but then I changed my mind. I thought if he came back again, that's when I'd tell you. Valeria asked a somewhat foolish question, her voice filled with helplessness. At this point, it almost didn't matter. The affair was being discussed in the open, and the plain truth had come to light. Just yesterday, she was confident that all misunderstandings were in the past, trying to move forward, forget, and bury everything that still echoed in her mind. But now, it felt like she had transformed into a small, beaten kitten that everyone was kicking, and no one was willing to stand up for. It's up to you to decide, Angelina responded calmly. I can tell you one thing, though. If I just beckon my finger at him, he'll come running. Angelina leaned back in her chair, deep in thought as if she was reminiscing about the time she spent with Desmond. She made a heavy sigh. He must have gone through so much. He probably thought I didn't notice how he kept avoiding me. But, you see, the heart has its reasons. I'll be honest with you. If he comes back next time, I won't turn him away. I'm a lonely woman. I've missed the touch of a man. After Desmond ran away the last time, something like an urge awoke in me, and I wanted to continue. But he must have been so scared that he decided to lay low for a while. Angelina once again delved into her memories, took another sip of her cooling coffee, and set the cup down gently on the saucer. She gazed out the window, where raindrops shimmered under the street lights. She remembered that this was the kind of weather when she had told Desmond that she was leaving him for someone else, mistakenly thinking that she'd live happily with Charles. Then, she let out a heavy sigh. What else was there to discuss? Valeria had said everything she wanted to say, albeit rather harshly, but Desmond had brought this upon himself. You shouldn't provoke a woman. She's like a fury, like a tsunami that sweeps away and burns everything in her path. He couldn't even explain properly. Out of fear, he had hidden away in his little hideaway. Let him know what vengeance truly meant. Valeria pushed her chair back and stood up. She swayed slightly and steadied herself with one hand on the table. Continuing to discuss how her husband still had feelings for his first love had become unbearably difficult. Angelina, seemingly oblivious to Valeria's condition, gazed out of the window with a smile, as if contemplating adding more to her story but hesitating to do so. Afraid of hearing more, Valeria croaked out, "No need to say anything more. I don't want to hear anything else." Desmond opened the door. Unusual silence filled the apartment. There were no footsteps to be heard. Usually, at this time, his wife would be in the kitchen, reheating something, clattering with plates and pots. It seemed she had forgotten to inform him that she'd be working late again. He opened the fridge, took out some pasta, and placed it in the microwave. On the table, there were some crumpled sheets of paper lying haphazardly. He opened the trash can, intending to throw them away but accidentally glanced at a familiar number. Scanning the text hastily, he reached the message exchange with Angelina. He was relieved that he had the foresight to block her number. The temptation had been great, but he couldn't bear to lose his family over a momentary impulse. It was one of those rare moments when a man his age, unexpectedly to everyone, was capable of irrational actions. He knew his wife would be delayed at work, so he had purposely gone to the Tiger service with a very specific intention. After the way Angelina had flirted with him last time, playfully promising to meet again, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He imagined it, anticipated it, and knew it would definitely happen. He also expected Angelina to later make excuses, regretting that she hadn't sorted things out when they were younger and had left him. In the end, he realized he didn't need that. He was terrified of losing his wife's trust, and he couldn't imagine what he would do if she didn't believe him and left him. Dana entered the kitchen. She had heard that her father had arrived. She had intentionally stayed in her room, feeling anxious, waiting for her mother, worrying. She regretted not going with her mother, but when she remembered that the printouts were still lying safely on the table, she decided to join her father. "What's this?" Desmond shook the papers. The discontent on his face was further evidence of his guilt. His eyes darted around, as if trying to escape from their sockets. "This is a printout of your calls and conversations with Aunt Angelina. By the way, why did you hide from Mom for so many years that you loved her so much when you were young?" His daughter's gaze bore into him with such intensity that it sent 1,000 shivers racing through his body. "Where's Mom? I hope she didn't see this." Desmond was convinced he could win over his daughter, explaining that he had become entangled. Unfortunately, adults sometimes make such mistakes, but it was all in the past. He had no interest in Aunt Angelina anymore. "My mom is at Aunt Angelina's. She said she'll be back soon," his daughter calmly explained. Desmond opened the cupboard, took out a bottle of whiskey, poured himself a quarter of a glass, and downed it in one gulp. The alcohol hit him immediately, causing his empty stomach to cramp up. Hearing the slam of the front door, he felt his heart constrict to the size of a small pea and plummet into his heels. Valeria had returned home. Her face said it all. Angelina had said too much. "Valeria, there was no intimacy between us. It was just flirting. I don't know what she's told you, but nothing happened. Please believe me." "I don't know what more I can do to make you believe me," he said. "You need to leave," Valeria said loudly. "Leave my life forever, so no one ever tells me again that my husband doesn't love me, that he drools over another woman, and still hasn't given up on the dream of taking his first love to bed. Please, just go. Live with my mother or—" She didn't finish the sentence. The implication was clear. She thought she'd resist, say she wouldn't go anywhere. But Desmond had behaved in a way that no one expected from him. "Fine, I'll stay with my mother for a few days. Just know, no matter what Angelina tells you, I love and have always loved only you. I never regretted leaving her, and it was you who became my wife," Desmond said as he left the kitchen, shuffling near the front door, hoping that maybe something would change. Dana stepped into the hallway. She desperately wanted to accuse her father, call him a traitor, explain that lying was wrong, and scream that her mom had someone to stand up for her. But she didn't say anything. She just closed the door behind him. Listening to Desmond's departure from the apartment, Valeria covered her face with her hands. Angelina's hurtful words echoed in her mind, shattering her pride, crushing her convictions, and the promises once made by her husband to love only her. How beautifully he used to speak. Valeria bitterly chuckled. For all these years, she considered herself happy, not even realizing that she had been living in a veiled form of mutual self-deception. "Mom, don't cry. Please don't," Dana said in a frightened tone as she sat down next to her, desperately trying to provide comfort. "What did Aunt Angelina tell you? I was so worried about you." Dad couldn't keep still. He paced the kitchen like a caged tiger when he found out you went to her. "You shouldn't have gone alone," she added. Not seeing any reaction, Valeria continued as if she were talking to herself. "I regret making all this mess. I've only made things worse for everyone. You did everything right. You did great. Thank you for not staying silent. If it weren't for you, Dad would be living with 2 families at best, or at worst, he would have told us and moved in with Aunt Angelina. For us, that would have been a huge surprise and a low blow," twisting her wedding ring on her ring finger. Valeria looked at her daughter with sorrow in her eyes. The conversation wasn't easy, and nobody could predict what would happen next. One thing was clear. If they didn't make an effort to improve their lives themselves, they couldn't expect anyone else to do it for them. If their father acted the way he did, it meant he wanted to. It was also understandable. Living with someone you don't love is difficult. "Mom, do you think he still loves her?" Dana asked, hitting a raw nerve. Valeria just looked at her daughter, unable to say a word. She could only shrug, shake her head, and, out of helplessness, finally let the tears flow. Desmond stopped on the street after leaving. A fine rain was falling outside. Droplets rustled softly as they rolled from leaf to leaf before slowly descending to the asphalt. The weather seemed to mock his gloomy mood, exacerbating the unpleasant situation he had gotten himself into due to his own foolishness and, in the process, had involved everyone else. Shivering, looking around, he reached his car in a rush. He jumped into the driver's seat and turned on the heater. It had been a long time since he had left home so late at night. He watched the empty courtyard with a strange feeling. With sadness, he glanced at the windows. In an instant, the realization struck that it was his efforts that had caused their familiar life to fall apart. Thoughts turned into needles that painfully pricked him. The constant headache made it clear that he needed to do something, to run somewhere. "Come on in," Angelina said with a smile, holding the door wide open as if she were welcoming a guest she had been waiting for her whole life. Desmond didn't bother calling or warning her. He just needed to know what she had told Valeria. In a foolish attempt to silence that particular gestalt by disconnecting his emotions, he decided that once wouldn't hurt. He had lost his mind, started making unforgivable mistakes, and dragged his loved ones into them. His body was revolting. It wanted to take risks, to rid himself of the dependency he had made up in his mind. If only he could turn back time. "I want to know what you might have told my wife. Valeria came from you very angry. She kicked me out of the house, thinking I still love you," he said coldly. "Maybe you should come in," Angelina suggested. "Or are we going to talk at the doorstep?" "No, let's talk here. I'm in a hurry," he replied, unconvincingly. There was still a memory of the day when he, forgetting about everything else, set out in search of adventures. But now, he would rather not know this woman at all. "All right, as you wish. Let's talk here," Angelina agreed. "Nothing excessive," she continued with a shrug. "I told Valeria that there was nothing between us. But if it weren't for Dana, it most likely would have happened. Isn't that so? Valeria found out that you and I were in love. She assumed that you still love me. I didn't try to convince her otherwise. Isn't that true? Michael even told me about it. I noticed a long time ago that you've been watching me with longing. Be honest with yourself at least. If you've set a goal that inspires you, don't change your decision. Let's give it a try. What if we can be happy together?" As Desmond mulled over her words in his head, Angelina moved closer, resting her head on his chest. She savored the sound of his loud heartbeat for a few seconds. Sensing his confusion, she deftly embraced his neck and stood there for a few more seconds. Taking his hand, she pulled him into her room. "Today, you won't escape from me. We'll get through this together." She stopped, licked her dry lips, clearly hinting at the decisive action she expected from him. Desmond, not understanding what he was doing, pounced on her as if he had never kissed before. Angelina held him as close as possible. It seemed that there was very little left to do, just a few steps, and they would finally reach the most important part. But suddenly, Desmond abruptly pulled away, looked at her as if he had confused her with someone else, and shook his head. "Angelina, I'm sorry, I can't," he muttered incoherently and left without looking back. He stopped by the door, glanced back one more time, as if bidding farewell forever. Her eyes were filled with tears, while Desmond's face remained motionless. "If you leave now, you will never learn my most intimate secret," Angelina forced out, revealing her ultimate card. "Angelina, you don't need to say anything." Desmond shook his head, as if shaking off an illusion, and looked at her once again. "You can't change anything. I had to make a lot of unforgivable mistakes to understand that I don't need anyone else besides my wife and Dana. Where did you get the idea that I still love you? Maybe there was some inexplicable youthful resentment, but it's not love. It's long gone, and today I finally realized it." Carefully turning the doorknob, he began to say goodbye, but Angelina, rushing to the door, slammed it shut and leaned against it, speaking. "Have you ever considered that Michael might be your son? I never had a DNA test. I didn't need it. Charles pays pretty good child support, but after a year, the funding will stop. His new wife recently gave birth to a child, so he can't wait for Michael to turn 18. Angelina closed her eyes and looked at him from beneath lowered eyelashes. She had longed to see how Desmond would react to such news. "When I was pregnant, I prayed to God for the baby to look like me. The heavens heard my prayers. Therefore, Charles never had any doubts that the child might not be his. But I often had such thoughts." Desmond stared at Angelina in bewilderment, struggling to discern whether she was joking or telling the truth. No, he needed to leave immediately before she came up with something else. She had artfully imposed the idea on him within a few minutes that he had an adult son, although she made a small note that it wasn't certain. It was as if she believed she was the only smart, wonderful, and perfect one while everyone else was idiots. "Even if it's true, your creativity is truly remarkable." Poor Charles. Though I could have been in his place once upon a time, he sighed, rubbing his forehead. He tilted his head as if wanting to look into her eyes again, as if, for the first time, he saw something he had been blind to before. Michael has a father, and I don't think we should mess with his psyche and convince him otherwise, just because you suddenly felt this way after 17 years. However, feel free to do a DNA test. If Michael turns out to be my son, which I highly doubt, I will help as much as I can. After answering all of her questions, Desmond left. Angelina stood near the door for a long time, listening to every rustle, hoping that Desmond would change his mind and return. But Desmond had no intention of doing so. Angelina no longer stirred tender feelings. Instead, she evoked irritation, mistrust, boredom, and an inexplicable feeling of repulsion. No matter how Valeria tried to convince her husband that she was willing to do anything for him, in reality, he had simply found it convenient to have her around. She never became his beloved. She couldn't even earn his basic respect. She was pleased to hear the ringtone of her phone. She grabbed it as if clutching a lifeline to distract herself from sad thoughts. She stared at the screen, trying to rearrange the letters dancing in different directions. She blinked several times to regain focus. It was her university friend. They used to chat occasionally, and when she visited her hometown on vacation, they always met up. Christina had moved to Amsterdam a long time ago, got a job in a reputable firm, and now she was offering Valeria a job. Do you remember how you dreamed of moving to Amsterdam? If you hadn't changed your mind, I can offer you the position of chief accountant. The salary is good, and the opportunities are huge. The offer intrigued her. It was as if Christina had sensed that Valeria urgently needed to make a change in her life. Why not give it a try? The farther she would be from her husband, the better it would be for everyone. Excited, Valeria rushed into her daughter's room. Dana, there's an opportunity to move to Amsterdam. Christina wrote that she can place me as the chief accountant in her organization. What do you think about it? She took a deep breath only when Dana raised her head and looked interested, as if she had been dreaming of nothing else. But what about school? Dana hesitated. That's not a problem. We'll get your records from the school. I'll resign. I think they'll make an exception for me and allow me not to work the mandatory 2 weeks. We'll pack our things, and in 3 days, we'll leave. We'll rent an apartment for the time being. I think Christina will help us. Valeria abruptly stopped the conversation. She was scared. It was one thing for her to go alone, but uprooting her child. I'm all for it. I've always dreamed of living and studying in a different school. Dana exclaimed, her face glowing. She was already imagining herself as a resident of Amsterdam. Valeria's heart squeezed painfully. She remembered how a coworker had once said, to forget an unfaithful husband, it would take exactly half the time they'd spent together. They had lived with Desmond for 16 years, which meant they'd have to stay in Amsterdam for 8 years to rid themselves of those feelings. Only then, if something didn't work out, could they return to their hometown. This outcome couldn't be ruled out either. So, you're not against it? Should I call Christina and say we're in? Valeria asked skeptically, still hoping her daughter would stop her and make her think at least until the morning. It wasn't so easy to just up and leave. For some reason, she suddenly wanted Dana to stop her, to make her reconsider her plan. She explained that decisions like these shouldn't be made so hastily. Call her, Dana said firmly. Exactly 3 days later, Valeria and Dana flew to Amsterdam, leaving a hastily written note on the table for her husband. Don't look for us. We've flown to Amsterdam. I was offered a job. I'll call you as soon as we're settled. We'll need to deal with the divorce, child support, and property division. We hold no grudge against you. Be happy. Valeria. Desmond spent a long time choosing flowers. He wanted to surprise his wife. At first, he was indecisive, overwhelmed by the choices. The saleswoman, with a smile on her face, offered ready-made bouquets, lilies, orchids. Desmond hesitated for a while before finally settling on white roses. He had never fixated on such details before. He used to go into the flower shop, pick the first bouquet he liked, and give it to his wife without worrying whether she'd like it or not. But today, he wanted to please his wife, to surprise her, to make an impression. As he stood outside the apartment door, Desmond paused and fidgeted for a few seconds. He took a deep breath and opened the door with his own keys, hoping someone would notice him. Realizing that no one was in the apartment, He walked through the rooms. As a precaution, he checked the walk-in closet and was surprised to find that his wife and daughter's wardrobes were nearly empty. What on earth was going on? Had they decided to completely change their wardrobes? Desmond sat on the couch and read the note left for him on the table for the 20th time. Is she out of her mind? She's gone as if she broke free from a chain. She even dragged our daughter along. She says she was offered a job. She should have consulted with me first, he grumbled nonstop, lamenting that he hadn't even been informed, indifferently gazing at the scattered roses on the floor. Desmond covered his face with his hands and let out a quiet groan. Maybe he shouldn't have left at all. He shouldn't have listened to well-wishers and should have immediately started seeking forgiveness. He was a fool for listening to his mother and waiting the prescribed 4 days. His mother had explained that an offended woman needed that much time to collect herself, draw conclusions, calm down, and only then sit down for discussions. I'll have to deal with the divorce, child support, and property division, he read in the hastily written note from his wife. What on earth is going on? What is happening at all? He wondered. He suspected that he would need a lot of patience. He would try to explain to his wife that there had been no infidelity. It was just curiosity. But at the same time, there was a test of his own feelings. He realized that no one mattered to him but his wife. However, he could never have dreamed of this outcome, not even in his worst nightmare. Desmond took out his phone, tried calling Valeria, but the subscriber was out of network range. Dana's number was also temporarily unavailable. You must answer me immediately. You had no right to take our daughter without my permission. I won't let this slide, he said in the first message. He listened to it several times. He wanted to delete it but changed his mind. Let her know he wouldn't give up. If she thought she could get away with it, she was mistaken. Without much thought, he sent the second message. Valeria, how could you do this? I didn't expect such an impulsive act from you. We haven't even had a proper conversation. Is this how you can do things? If you don't respond, I'll file a police report. It's better not to make me angry. Valeria, please answer me. I've come home. I wanted to talk, to apologize. I am very worried about both of you. Write to me your new address. I'll come, and we can talk peacefully. There was nothing between Angelina and me. I don't need her. I'm deeply concerned about both of you. Valeria, I love you very much. After sending his third voice message, still holding the phone, Desmond impatiently awaited a response. He walked through the apartment once more, checking every corner. He even peeked under the bed for some reason and opened the refrigerator. It was as though he was looking for proof that his beloved girls had decided to play a prank on him. Simultaneously, he called and complained to his mother, reciting the note she had left for him, pieces of which were scattered all over the apartment. I told you to get Angelina out of your head. Now, think about how you're going to clean up this mess. Enough with the lectures. Why don't you tell me what to do? Where do I find them? Amsterdam is a big city. I've never even been interested in which organization her friend works for. I don't remember her last name either, Desmond grumbled. All you can do is wait, said his mother. If Valeria thinks she can run away without talking to me or listening, take Dana with her and file for a divorce. She's sorely mistaken. There was no infidelity, which means it's not over yet. There will be no divorce. Welcome to Amsterdam. Christina embraced Valeria. She couldn't imagine what had happened and why Valeria and Dana had decided to move to Amsterdam so suddenly. They would talk about it later. She could see that Valeria was evasive when asking questions about her husband. She tried to steer the conversation away from Desmond, as if he no longer existed in her life. The car stopped in front of an old building. You'll be staying here for the time being. The house isn't great, but the apartment is furnished and in good condition. Settle in today, make yourselves at home, and they'll be waiting for you at work tomorrow. Don't worry, everything will be fine, Christina reassured, as if she understood without words or explanations that they had left for a reason. Valeria and Dana settled in the apartment, went to the nearest supermarket for groceries, and unpacked their belongings. Tired but content, they both collapsed onto the couch. It's okay. This is just the beginning. Everything will be fine, Valeria reassured herself. She listened to the messages from Desmond without responding. To keep him from bothering them further, she blocked his number. Mom, Dad keeps calling, and I don't know what to tell him, Dana said, as the phone kept ringing nonstop. She had to put it on silent mode, right, that were not available for him right now, Valeria said. She noted to herself that it would be nice not to hear from him at all in the near future. On one hand, it was good that they had left. There was so much to sort out, and she didn't have time to think about where Desmond would spend his evenings or with whom. Memories of the past would gradually fade into the background, leaving only a bitter aftertaste from the dirty deeds that had left an indelible mark and would continue to cause sharp pain inside for a long time. Now, everything would be different. A new life, a new job, a new school. To avoid giving up halfway, it was crucial to start correctly. Get rid of everything that was unsatisfactory and move forward. The world seemed to have gone mad. Desmond couldn't figure out what to do, how to maintain composure in these unforeseen circumstances, and where to find the key to solving the problem. It was disheartening that even his closest and most beloved ones didn't try to understand or talk things through. They turned their backs on him and went their own way, leaving him behind in the old life they no longer wanted to be a part of. And now he sat on the couch in proud solitude, staring into the void, utterly lost. "They don't care about me." He bitterly smiled at the unexpected text message from his daughter and almost broke into tears. In a split second, his entire life flashed before his eyes. "They are really angry. They don't even want to talk. They think I won't find them. They don't know me well." He checked his contacts, dialed a familiar lawyer's number, greeted him, and briefly explained the situation. He asked for help, promising that he wouldn't forget it. He was willing to pay any amount for the address where his wife lived in Amsterdam. Without wasting any time, he logged into social media and tried to find his wife's schoolmate or anyone who might know where and what she worked as. "I've got some information. I'm currently in a bar. Come by. You won't regret it." A brief message arrived from the lawyer. He shut down his laptop and dashed to the bar. "Here you go." The lawyer handed him a slip of paper with the address written on it by hand. "No need to thank me. It was easy to do. Just a couple of phone calls." The thought that tomorrow, or at the latest the day after, Desmond would be where he was absolutely unwanted gave him a lift in spirits. He now had a reason to celebrate, a desire to thank his friend with some drinks, to make sure the person didn't regret helping him. He wanted to ensure it was an enjoyable evening. His tongue was already starting to stumble, but Desmond tried his best to keep the conversation going, to be part of the casual chat. His eyes were growing heavy. He was just about to apologize, thank his friends once more, and head home when a familiar voice stopped him. "Desmond, I've never seen you like this. What are you celebrating?" Angelina asked with surprise. Desmond turned and looked at the woman he had quickly grown disappointed with. However, at this moment, he was incredibly relieved by her presence. He smiled, took her hand, and invited her to sit at the table. He leaned closer and put his hand on her shoulder. "I'm taking a break. My wife left me. She went to Amsterdam and took our daughter with her. So, I'm a free man now," he said with a meaningful arch of his eyebrow, as if contemplating something. He glanced at the suddenly brightened Angelina. "I hope this isn't because of me," she cautiously inquired. There were many things she could have said to him right now, but there were strangers around them. What they might say to each other was not meant for other people's ears. It was their innermost secret. "What does it matter? And how did you end up here?" Desmond responded. At this moment, Angelina seemed so beautiful, kind, and understanding. No matter what she said now, it didn't matter. The most important thing was that they had met, and, strangely enough, they were both happy about it. "We were meeting with Charles. There were some things we needed to discuss," she replied to his question. "Desmond, that's enough for you. You can barely stand on your feet. Let me take you home. You can nurse your hangover tomorrow." She hinted that she wouldn't abandon him in this condition. She would take him home and only then relax. "Let's go," he nodded. It really was time for him to go home. Their relationship had ended without even really beginning. Breaking up was the best option for both of them. But right now, the feeling of sympathy had grown stronger. He liked the light shining so brightly inside her. It was no longer pushing him away. On the contrary, it drew him in, like a mote to a flame. What difference did it make who deceived whom or who left whom? At this moment, it didn't matter. Indeed, there was no difference, because in the morning, they woke up together in Valeria's marital bed. Raising his head from the pillow, Desmond saw Angelina next to him. Nausea welled up in his throat. He tried to move. Angelina opened her eyes, smiled, and, seeing Desmond's stunned look, burst into a sharp laugh. "How are you feeling? Despite your state, you were amazing last night. I won't be surprised if, after tonight, we give Michael a little brother or sister," she said sweetly, stretched in the bed for a moment, and instantly pictured how Michael would react to this news. But she didn't have to dream for long. Her phone rang. "Yes, honey. Don't worry. I'm fine. Yes, we woke up. Get ready for school, or you'll be late." "No, don't wait for me today. I'll have to spend the night at Uncle Desmond's again." "Michael knows you spent the night at my place." Desmond barely managed to ask. He couldn't bear the thought of baseless rumors reaching his wife. After everything that happened today, he would have to face his daughter with his head held high. Words echoed in Desmond's head. Angelina kept saying something, smiling as if she were mocking him deliberately. It felt like time had stopped at the moment when Desmond had just opened his eyes and saw the face of the woman who had once attracted him inexplicably. She had seemed so beautiful, but now had turned disgustingly hateful and unpleasant. Propping his head with his hand, Angelina turned to her side, modestly covering her chest with a sheet, while leaving other parts of her body exposed and available for viewing. "I don't remember anything. If something really happened between us, then..." Desmond swallowed hard, deciding not to continue. It was clear enough. "Angelina, what is all this about? Why are you deceiving me?" He tried to appeal to her conscience. It felt like his head was about to split. Nevertheless, Desmond summoned his willpower. He got up, sat on the edge of the bed, rubbed his face with his hands, and then looked at Angelina attentively. He would give anything to have her not there right now. "What do you want to hear?" she playfully said. "Don't you remember anything at all?" He shook his head. "If I hadn't been there with you, you probably wouldn't have even made it to your apartment. You fell asleep in the car. I had to call Michael. Luckily, he wasn't busy. Together with him, we brought you home. And when I was undressing you to put you to bed, Michael called Dana. He told her he was at your place. Of course, she didn't believe him, so he sent her a short video," she added when she saw Desmond's bewildered face. "Don't worry, I scolded him for that. To try to calm him down, she approached him. She wrapped her arms around his torso and leaned in close to his back. But Desmond didn't appreciate it. He grimaced in pain from his headache, and he pulled her hands apart. "What difference does it make whether we slept together or not? Valeria won't be able to prove anything anymore. Desmond, it's fate. I'm completely innocent in this. Michael is a grown-up and understands everything perfectly, and Dana is no fool. Even though I scolded Michael for being too talkative, I'm sure he told Dana that I stayed the night with you. I'm sorry, but you were in such a state that I couldn't leave you alone." Angelina got out of the bed, put on Valeria's old robe, and tied it around herself. Casting a sidelong glance at Desmond, she said softly, "I'll check the medicine cabinet for some aspirin for you, and then I'll make breakfast. We need to get you back to life somehow." In his head, Michael's face flashed by, and a fragment emerged when Desmond, leaning on his shoulder, unsteadily entered the elevator. The infectious laughter of Angelina, who had supported him on the other side and guided her son on what to do next. If something had happened between them, Desmond thought, he would surely remember it. More likely, they had undressed him, put him to bed, and for the sake of amusement, Michael had captured a few compromising moments to laugh about the next day. Getting up from the bed, Desmond's gaze landed on his things. They were neatly folded on the bedside table. If there had been any passion between them, his belongings would be scattered all over the place. This fact encouraged the assumption that there was no sexual encounter. Putting on a casual t-shirt and shorts, he left the bedroom. Angelina was rummaging through the medicine cabinet while something was cooking on the stove. "Why did you have to send that video to my daughter? I'm absolutely sure nothing happened between us." Desmond paused, hoping Angelina would relent and confirm his assumptions. She indifferently shrugged her shoulders and didn't give a direct answer. "And didn't you forget how you were waving to your daughter while you were in your underwear? I tried to explain to Dana that I ended up at your apartment by accident, but who would listen to me? She wouldn't even talk to me. She immediately hung up on me and even turned off her phone for a while so Michael couldn't reach her. Do you want to see yourself from another perspective?" Angelina took her phone from the table, thought for a moment, and then put it back down. Michael sent you the video too. You can watch it on your own smartphone. It was amusing to watch you from an outsider's perspective. Desmond shook his head and stepped back a few paces. It was easy to believe in the irrefutable evidence of his direct culpability in front of his wife. He remembered vividly how he had been waving to his daughter, thinking there was nothing wrong with it. Get ready and leave my place. This isn't a hotel. In 5 minutes, you should be gone. I have enough problems without you. Why did you even come to my house, knowing well that Valeria wouldn't like it? I understand that I'm to blame for everything, but you should have thought twice before doing that. Seeing her puzzled expression, he pointed at the door once again. Is this your idea of gratitude? Angelina asked, not understanding her own guilt. But Desmond didn't care anymore. Ignoring Angelina's bewildered look, he dialed his boss's number, intending to take a few days off and quickly go to the place where his fate would be ultimately decided after a sincere apology. He would tell his wife everything, without hiding anything. Desmond persistently knocked on the door, first once, then twice, then a third time. He was afraid that someone had given him the wrong address, and if that were true, he wouldn't be able to handle it. His heart was pounding in his chest, as if it could sense that nothing good would come out of this endeavor. Valeria would simply cast him out and refuse to speak to him. In her place, he might have done the same. How could one trust someone when everything they did always seemed to turn against them? Hello, Valeria said in surprise. Her expression didn't bode well, but Desmond wasn't going to back down. Hello, he nodded and stepped into the apartment, closing the door behind him. Ignoring his wife's displeased look, we need to talk, he said with confidence. Valeria frowned even more, and her lips tightened into a thin line. After a minute of thought, she shook her head uncertainly. Desmond walked into the apartment and looked around thoughtfully. He then turned his gaze to Valeria. She didn't want to see him, and she turned to the window. With a sigh, she began tapping her fingers on the windowsill. I spent last night with Angelina. I know it sounds ridiculous, but there was nothing between us. Valeria smirked. There was no point in appealing to someone's conscience. She thought, let him say whatever he wants. She didn't care anymore. Desmond approached, grabbed her by the shoulders, and turned her to face him. When will you stop lying? I'm so tired of all of this. Tell me why you came. Dana will be here soon, and then we can all talk. I'm not leaving until you listen. Even if we assume that nothing happened between you two, spending the night in our marital bed with another woman is the height of cynicism. Why did you come? Don't you understand that our family is no more? Valeria shrugged her shoulders. She looked at Desmond with disdain and refused to understand him. He had spent a wonderful night with Angelina, and now he came with her scent, with memories. Her voice, her cheerful laughter were probably still etched in his memory. Valeria didn't want to listen to him, whatever he said. Aren't you ashamed to look your daughter in the eyes? Desmond's face revealed confusion. His combat readiness had completely dissipated. Sadness mixed with concern appeared in his eyes. Upon hearing the front door open, Valeria smirked. She raised her chin, approached the window, and leaned on the windowsill. She hugged herself, shuddering when her daughter entered the living room with a displeased expression. Dad, what are you doing here? Why did you come? You should be grateful to us. You're living with your beloved woman. Your dream has finally come true. There's no need to hide. We could even put our relationship on display now, Dana said. After Michael had sent several videos to her phone, she hadn't slept all night. She felt sorry for herself, for her mother, who her father had trampled in the mud. Dana, I know I'm deeply in the wrong before you and your mom, but it's not what it seems. I really had nothing with Angelina. I could never cross that line, honestly. If I wanted her, I wouldn't be here now. How can I make you understand that I don't need her? Dana shook her head. It was disgusting to listen to her father's excuses. It was so ridiculous that she couldn't hold back her tears. They rolled down her cheeks, finding the resting place on her lips, and she could taste the salt. Dad, go away. I'm ashamed of you. It's a good thing we left. All of Michael's friends know that Aunt Angelina is your lover. Michael even hinted to me that he might be my half-brother. No matter what you say, I don't know about Mom, but I won't be able to trust you anymore. It's disgusting to think that Michael might be my brother. How could you deceive us for so many years? Valeria walked over to Dana, embraced her, and ran her fingers over her cheeks, wiping away her tears. She felt sorry for her daughter, not for herself. I wanted to tell you everything from the moment we became friends with Angelina. Then explain how we broke up and how I fell in love with your mom. Get to the most important part and say that I don't need Angelina. I've thought about it a lot. Let's sell our apartment. Let's all move to Amsterdam together. Let's start fresh. Leave all the misunderstandings in the past. I'm ready to do anything for you. Desmond couldn't understand himself. He had transformed from a confident man into a pathetic, indecisive person. It seemed like he was about to lose his self-respect. Can't anything be changed? I'll quit drinking. We'll move to Amsterdam. Angelina won't be around. It's not too late, Desmond timidly proposed. Of course, there was no affair. Otherwise, where would those rumors about a love child come from? Valeria interrupted him. Thank God we left. No one will point fingers at Dane in school and laugh that she has an older brother. Maybe this should have been done many years ago, to act according to the situation without regard for others' opinions, not to waste time and file for divorce. Desmond, I've been thinking for a long time. I even prepared myself for the possibility that if you came and tried to convince us, I might have given you another chance. I even imagined how all of this would happen. Valeria smirked wryly, as if scolding herself for her unhealthy farts. But after last night, no, no, and no. We can never be together. You don't love me. We don't respect you. We don't trust you. I don't want to torture either you or myself. And the rumor about a love child, that was the last straw. Pointing at the door, Valeria held her daughter even tighter. Dad, go away, Dana repeated with a steely voice. However, Desmond had already understood everything and chose not to defend himself further. He lowered his head, stood there for a while longer, and eventually headed for the exit. You'll receive a court summons. Don't be surprised. I'll file for a divorce soon, Valeria informed him before the entrance door closed behind him. Desmond stepped outside. He should have told Valeria everything from the beginning. If she had known who their neighbor was, maybe she would have listened and not insisted on buying the apartment he had so adamantly refused. He had a feeling that it wouldn't end well. Desmond shook his head. Today, he had seen his wife as if for the first time, appreciating her anew. A slim, sensible, beautiful woman who knew her worth. She carried herself with confidence, naturally, with dignity. Such a woman would never deceive her husband. She wouldn't be unfaithful. Throughout the journey, Desmond pondered his wife's words. Goosebumps ran down his spine at the mention of divorce. A deeply ingrained thought haunted him. Could nothing be salvaged? There were no hopeless situations. You just needed to think carefully. He took solace in the undeniable fact that there had been no affair. Desmond was fully aware that after what he had done, getting forgiveness from his wife would be unlikely. Farts came in fragments, only to be mercilessly cut short. They connected in pieces and passed by. There were so many of them. Desmond discarded one version after another and couldn't decide which one to latch onto. He realized it was all in the past. There was no point in making decisions or taking action. But he yearned to try at least one more time. Approaching the house, he received a message from Angelina. How did it go? I hope Valeria believed you. I called her several times, wanted to talk and explain, but she didn't answer me. Decided to ask you about the state of your relationship. Angelina inquired. Desmond frowned. If only he had foreseen the disastrous consequences of his foolish desire to prove to Angelina, he would have immediately expelled this foolish idea from his troubled mind. At first, he considered not replying at all, but then changed his mind and dialed Angelina's number. Why are you calling my wife? Who asked you to justify yourself? Don't you understand that they don't want to talk to you? Stop pretending to be righteous. To be heard, you should have stayed out of your friend's husband's bed, not recorded videos, and not leaked compromising material, he scolded her. Desmond fell silent. Angelina was quite the character. She'd go far. She could turn any situation to her advantage. A woman like her wouldn't sit idle by. Listen, Angelina. Why is Michael spreading rumors that he might be my son? What nonsense is this? Why talk about it to my daughter? What kind of game are you and Michael playing? Well, aren't you in a hurry now? Your wife didn't forgive you, kicked you out, so now you're seeking revenge on me. A loving wife, before leaving her husband, figures everything out. And if she didn't want to listen to anyone, It means she simply didn't love you. Think about it. As for Michael, Angelina coughed and sighed, as if he had touched the most painful subject. She rubbed her nose. Michael figured it out himself. He saw our joint photos. He put his next to them and openly shared his assumptions. Now he's insisting on a DNA test, and he's completely convinced that you're his real father. Listening to Angelina, Desmond marveled at how she managed not to take anything too close to heart, to stay calm, to ignore minor mishaps, and to respond to adversity at any time. Meanwhile, a hurricane raged within him. It seemed like he would explode into hysterical shouting soon, followed by a stream of expletives. Okay, I've heard you. I'm curious myself now. I'll find out everything, and I'll call you. If it's so important to you, I'm ready to take a paternity test. But if the test comes back negative, Michael will have to call Dana and apologize to her. That's my condition. So, are you ready? Desmond held an envelope in his hand. Michael was smiling, and Angelina was visibly anxious. She pressed her head closer to Michael's shoulder and stared at Desmond, as if hypnotizing him. Desmond didn't care anymore. He simply had no strength left. He wanted to put his doubts to rest and finally get to the truth. It couldn't get any worse than it already was. Open it. I can't stand the waiting, Angelina urged him impatiently. Desmond opened the envelope. Angelina couldn't stand his hesitation and snatched the neatly folded pages from his hands. They had been waiting for the results for 2 weeks. Their patience had run out. His heart periodically leaped out of his chest. He really wanted to justify his son's hope. Michael wouldn't even entertain the thought that he wasn't Desmond's son, and Angelina was willing to do anything as long as the paternity test confirmed it. Seeing the 0 on the paper, Angelina could only manage a bitter smile. She carefully reread the conclusion once more. The probability of paternity, 0%. There was no room for error. Angelina shook her head and squinted her eyes. She turned her head, looking first at the satisfied Desmond and then at the perplexed Michael. It had been a bad idea to bring up this topic at all. Satisfied, she forced herself to say, as though she had received an undeserved slap to the face, "It'll be dull here. Drop by some time. We don't abandon our own in times of trouble. We'll always feed you well, listen to you, and give you sound advice," she said, as if nothing terrible had happened. Regardless of the result, they would remain friends. Having demonstratively handed him the envelope, she took Michael by the arm, and they slowly left the laboratory. Valeria was offered quite a decent salary. She couldn't even dream of such an amount before, but when they arrived at their rented apartment, they were surprised by how much more they needed to purchase. There was some crockery in the apartment, but there was so little of it, just a couple of cups, forks, and spoons. They went to the nearest store. They barely had time to put only the most essential items into the cart: bedding, forks, cups, pans. When the cashier announced the total amount, Valeria could only roll her eyes, take out her bank card, and pay in silence. In addition, they had to buy Dana some new clothes. After all, a new school meant new friends, and they wanted her to look just as good as the others. All the money on the card seemed to have disappeared in just a few days. "Dana, it seems we didn't budget for our expenses properly. Maybe I should muster the courage, call your father, and ask for some money. What do you think? Maybe you could request an advance at work." Dana replied, "I'll do just that. I'll find out about an advance tomorrow. If they don't allow it, I'll have to turn to your father. You're the head accountant yourself. Quietly request an advance and don't tell anyone," Christina calmly suggested. "If you're so worried, go talk to the director in person. Ask for permission from him. I hope he understands and can't refuse you. Go to him right now." After hearing the advice, Valeria got up and went to the director's office. She hadn't even opened the door when she collided sharply with the director, causing the water he held in his hand to spill onto his shirt. "What do you want?" he asked, irritated, while wiping the transparent liquid off his shirt. Valeria lowered her gaze and involuntarily gasped. Her new water-soaked blouse was drenched all the way through, clinging to her chest. To make matters worse, the button on her chest had come undone, exposing all of her charms. Instead of turning around and leaving, she began to fasten it. "I'm sorry. It was an accident," he averted his gaze. "It's all right. I'll come back later," she replied. Valeria blushed, turned around, and, ignoring the secretary who had just entered, rushed out of the office. She hadn't been able to request the advance. Nothing happens by chance. It seemed like someone was sending her a warning sign, telling her not to do it. Back in her office, she took a deep breath, counted to 10 in her mind, and then, feeling somewhat calmer, began her work. To avoid any further misunderstandings, I didn't want to call you into my office again. I decided to come in and check on your mood. I was about to tell my secretary to bring you a glass of cold water, and then you. The director's voice interrupted her thoughts as she heard him speak. Once again, Valeria was flustered. Jason sat down on the offer chair, and he scrutinized the blouse. After making sure there were no stains on it, he continued to speak. Why did you come in? It was a personal matter, but I've already made up my mind. Jason continued to look at her in surprise. I wanted to ask if it's possible to get a small advance, but I changed my mind, she blurted out in a single breath. Why is that? He asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. I decided it would be rather inconvenient. I've only been working for a few days, she replied, feeling her cheeks burn under his gaze. I have a proposition for you. I'm inviting you to lunch. Refusals are not accepted. Get ready. Seeing her hesitation, he added, I want to get to know the chief accountant better. Don't think anything of it. It's just lunch. Consider it an order. Yes, I remember you're currently facing financial difficulties, but I will pay for the meal. From the keen interest he showed in her, Valeria concluded that her boss found her attractive. However, she had no intention of sharing her personal life with anyone. To everyone, she was married, and there was no need for anyone to know that she was planning a divorce. Dana, hello. Thanks for answering. I thought you wouldn't want to talk to me. Desmond hesitated for a while. He had considered calling Valeria, had even dialed her number several times, but had never gone through with it. Dad, what do you want? Dana replied with an audible sigh. Speak. What do you want? Desmond brightened up. His daughter had finally deigned to talk to him. Perhaps Michael had called her. Dana, I want to ask you and your mother for forgiveness again. You see, I received a court summons today, but I don't want to get a divorce. I love you both. The rumors about me still loving Angelina, they are all false. It's not true. Could you what? Dana interrupted, not letting him finish. Do you have anything else to say? Dana, I had a DNA test done. Michael is not my son. You don't have a half-brother. The more he talked, the more Dana frowned. She preferred to act as if she weren't interested at all, but the fact that she didn't have a half-brother made her happy. Congratulations, she managed to say. Dad, well, since I'm your only daughter, maybe you could give me some money. You understand, Mom has a lot of expenses right now, she added timidly. You can even consider it a loan. Mom will get her salary and pay you back. Of course, I'll send you money. I'll send it every month. You don't have to worry about that. I don't need much. The main thing is that you don't need anything, her father assured her as he continued to talk, rambling and apologizing once again. He also asked her to tell her grandmother that he had called and that she should call Dana tomorrow if she didn't talk to her today. Thank you, she quietly said. Tell Mom about your request. At work, people should focus on their work. Outside communication distracts from the work process. Jason sat in his office, thinking about Valeria's words. He had wanted to make an impression and build a rapport. After all, they would be working together. But she had an inflated opinion of herself. The next day, while signing the advance payment sheet, Jason was surprised not to see her name on the list. Julie, call the chief accountant. Urgently. Did you call me? Valeria entered the room. I couldn't find your name on the advance payment list, he said dryly, not even looking at her. My husband transferred money to my account yesterday. I thought I could manage without an advance this month. Thanks for your concern, she replied, his right eyebrow raised. He didn't ask for further details. All right, I understand. I just thought you were embarrassed. I wanted to make sure. Jason nodded, pretending to be very busy. He leaned over the papers spread out on the table. If you have no more questions for me, can I go to my workplace? Yes. The door suddenly swung open, and a woman entered the room with loud clacking heels. Valeria had never met her before. She was wearing an expensive bright green pantsuit with heavy makeup on her face, as if she had just stepped out of a glossy magazine. She paused for a moment, casually inspecting Valeria from head to toe, and then turned to speak to Jason. Absolutely fabulous. Is this the lady you had lunch with yesterday at the restaurant? Addressing Jason but still studying Valeria as though she posed a significant threat. Valeria, I won't keep you any longer, Jason said loudly. However, the woman, paying no attention to his words, grabbed Valeria's elbow and muttered through clenched teeth. If I see you two together again, you'll be responsible for the consequences. I won't repeat myself. Wait, let's get this straight. First of all, I'm married. Secondly, I have no interest in other men whatsoever, Valeria quietly stated. Married? I was told you were divorced. The woman didn't let Valeria finish. If you don't believe me, we can go to my office together, and I'll show you my passport. Jason, who had been observing their verbal exchange with interest, came closer. Valeria, you may go. I apologize for the misunderstanding. Some of our employees don't know how to behave. Instead of working, they spread gossip. Without understanding the situation, they dive into everything, believing they're friends. Exiting the office, Valeria breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time since her divorce, she was glad that she hadn't yet put the divorce stamp in her passport. Is it really that hard to understand she came here to work and earn money, not to seduce men? The thought is almost laughable. As she explained to Jason yesterday, she would never allow any flirting at work. After such an incident, she would avoid men entirely. All conversations would be strictly work-related. No more shared lunches, let alone dinners. Valeria walked into her home. What a day it had been. Not only had some insane woman gotten jealous of the director, but after their conversation, she had to take a calming pill in her office. As if that wasn't enough, Jason himself decided to pull a stunt. He brought a bouquet of flowers as an apology. This was the last thing she needed. Someone might see this, report it, and then she'd have to explain herself. She barely managed to escort him out of her office along with the bouquet, explaining that such problems were unnecessary. She feared this crazy woman might ambush her at home, but luckily, nothing happened. Mom, Grandma made dinner. We've set the table. We're just waiting for you. Dana chattered nonstop. Despite being upset with her father, she still loved and respected her grandmother. During dinner, her mother-in-law repeatedly returned to the subject of the impending divorce. She asked her to think it over, try to understand and forgive her son. She teared up, remembering how much Desmond was suffering. He lived alone and showed no interest in other women. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden doorbell. Mom, there's a flower delivery for you, Dana said. Dana brought the bouquet into the kitchen, which Valeria had returned to Jason. He couldn't leave the bouquet in the office. He needed to show that he would have the last word. Got on my nerves, Valeria grumbled. Dana took a vase, confident that the bouquet was from her father. She hummed a cheerful tune while arranging the flowers in the vase, and then placed it on the windowsill to keep it out of the way. Do you have an admirer? Her mother-in-law asked, examining the bouquet. Valeria initially considered sharing everything and complaining about how she probably wouldn't last long in these conditions. However, she vocalized something entirely different. Do you think only your son's first love held on to him for a long time? I had relationships before meeting Desmond, too. And this, she gestured to the flowers. Greetings from the past. While I was married to your son, of course, I never allowed such things. But now I have nothing to lose. Maybe it's time to stop playing with each other's nerves. Desmond has realized his mistake. Some women turn a blind eye to second families. I'm not justifying my son, but I'm sure there was nothing between him and that Angelina. Thank goodness it all worked out this way. I'm confident that there's a chance to save the family. I'm calm about Desmond now, but you, Valeria, you might regret it later. Jennifer decided to share everything she thought with her future daughter-in-law. On one hand, she really wanted to keep the family together. She had to give credit to Valeria. She wasn't the worst wife. Of course, not perfect. She had a stubborn character. Once she had a certain belief, it was hard to change her mind. Jennifer, don't try to reconcile us. Unfortunately, it's impossible now. I'm not going to forgive anyone. I wish your son to build a strong family with the woman he's loved and adored his entire life. It's hurtful for me, but I think I'll manage somehow. Valeria got up, turned on the kettle, and brought out mix. She started clearing the dirty dishes from the table, ignoring her mother-in-law. And do you think your new boyfriend is so much better than my son? Don't forget that you don't know anything about him. Divorcing is easy. The main thing is not to regret it afterward. With your departure, you've already given my son a good scare. It serves him right. Let him worry. It'll be a good lesson for him. If he needed Angelina, they'd be together by now. Before it's too late, think it over carefully. Jennifer felt offended on her son's behalf. He wasn't sleeping, he was grieving, and he wanted to do everything to save the family. Yet his future daughter-in-law was wasting her time. Such pride. Jennifer was sure that she was also feeling the pain of the breakup, but she would never admit that it was hard for her. This matchmaker rewarded her with character. Grandma? Stop it. Dad is completely at fault. Don't defend him. Mom did everything right. I don't know how I'd be studying at the old school now. Just the rumors about the possibility of Michael being my brother would have probably pushed me to a nervous breakdown. I won't even mention his other actions. I'm not defending my son. As a woman, Valeria, I understand you. But the most important thing is that Desmond realized he was wrong. He's willing to do anything just to be with you. After that night when Angelina came to him from the restaurant, he's either been at home or with me. I never liked Angelina. A few times, she even tried to visit, but I tactfully turned her down. If you don't believe me, let me call him on speakerphone right now. Son, how are you? What are you up to? Hi, Mom. I'm at home, watching TV. How's everything with you? Everything's good. We had dinner. We'll be going to bed soon. Jennifer answered Desmond's questions, glancing at Valeria, who was washing the dishes, pretending she wasn't affected by any of this. Dad, thanks for the money, Dana chimed in. You're welcome. It's my direct responsibility. We should get a bonus this month. If we do, I'll transfer more to you. Jennifer could only nod slowly, preparing to say the most important thing. After wishing her son good night, she hung up. Who else will care for you like that? Jennifer teared up. She had tried to hold back until now, but unexpectedly, her emotions got the better of her. Give me your word that you'll think about it. I'll think about it, Valeria replied. Desmond hung up the phone, smiling. The conversation had turned out to be so warm and heartfelt, like in the old good times. Hearing a persistent doorbell ring, he jumped in surprise. Without looking through the peephole, he swung the door open. Angelina, what's going on again? He glanced at the clock. It was already 10 p.m. He had already brushed his teeth and was ready to lie down on the couch. Before talking to his mom, he was watching some action movie on TV, and then he tried to figure out what he had missed in the film. Desmond, we bought a refrigerator today. We plugged it in, but Michael and I can't set the temperature. Could you help us? I came in my car to pick you up. As soon as you set it, I'll take you back. We've been trying to decipher these complicated instructions as best as we could, but we can't figure out how to set the right temperature, Angelina said apologetically. Without waiting for a response, she continued, Desmond, please, Michael has school tomorrow morning. I have work. The movers took the old fridge to the dump. I don't know what to do. I tried calling people from ads, but they can only come tomorrow. My groceries could spoil. Can't you ask a neighbor? He asked, even though he understood that it was just an excuse to see her again. After that, to show his gratitude, he'd pull a bottle of wine from the bar and find a quick snack. It had worked once. It should work again according to her logic. I went to the neighbors. One is on a business trip, the other one is asleep, and the third one is somewhere out. Hasn't come home in 3 days, she replied promptly. Angelina, enough. You won't get anything out of this. Couldn't you think of anything smarter? How could you come to this? Did you think long? Desmond, don't think poorly of me. I know my worth, and I'd never run after a man. I'm used to them pursuing me themselves. I didn't even want to come to you, but I really have no one else to turn to, she said, sounding hurt. Well, if you think I am being deceitful, then I apologize. Goodbye. Watch some TV, he said as he turned away. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button. Demonstratively, he turned his back. All right, I'm sorry. Wait for me in the car. I'll be out in 5 minutes. Just, Angelina, let's make an agreement. No alcohol, no drama. As soon as I set the temperature, you'll take me back immediately. And please, explain to Michael that he shouldn't turn this into a big deal. As Desmond rode the elevator down, He wasn't sure how to handle the situation. Instead of declining or coming up with a quick excuse, he chose the harder path. In his attempt to be noble, he was digging himself into a huge hole, naively thinking that people would appreciate his intentions. "Good evening," Michael said. They had spent the entire evening waiting for the delivery, and then together with his mother, they had gone through the refrigerator's instructions, assembling shelves and ensuring there were no scratches or chips. "Good evening." Desmond extended his hand. "What seems to be the problem here?" Desmond took the instruction manual that Michael handed him, quickly glanced through it, and in just 15 minutes, he set the desired temperature. There weren't any significant issues, as their refrigerator was exactly the same as Valeria's. "That's it. Nothing complicated. You can start loading your groceries," Desmond said, trying to speak calmly but remaining on guard, expecting some catch or unpleasantness to arise out of nowhere. "Well, Mom, you were worried that there'd be no one to help us." "Thanks, Uncle Desmond. It's a shame I don't have such a helpful father," Michael said. "I called Dad, but he immediately refused, even without fully hearing my request." "If that's all, then I'll be heading home," Desmond stated. He noticed Angelina's questioning gaze, making her blush slightly. "Would you like some tea?" she asked absent-mindedly, pouring water into the kettle. "Angelina, thank you, but there's no need for anything else. In fact, I agreed to help because I want to talk to you both seriously." Desmond sighed heavily. He didn't like these pointless confrontations. "First, I want to ask Michael to stop spreading rumors. And Angelina, I want to explain to you that the infatuation I once had for you has long faded. You shouldn't deceive yourself. While you have every right to think whatever you want, remember one thing: there can be nothing between us. Everything has remained in the past. So, I want to warn you in advance. If you both don't stop causing us trouble, we may have to resort to more radical measures. Even if Valeria leaves me, it won't change anything. I cannot live with a woman I do not love. I'd rather spend the rest of my life alone, but at least I'll be honest with myself," Desmond said. He cleared his throat a couple of times, his ears turning red with anxiety, but all of it was deep within him. Outwardly, Desmond appeared completely composed. Angelina remained silent, and Michael looked away, making it impossible to understand his thoughts. "If you have no more questions for me, then I'll go. You don't need to drive me. My place is nearby. I'll take a walk before bed. Good night." Without saying anything else, Desmond left the kitchen. He took off his windbreaker, and without uttering another word, he exited the apartment. It was a good thing he had taken precautions just in case. He had turned on the voice recorder and recorded everything on his phone. Desmond shivered, zipped up his windbreaker. There wasn't a single star in the sky. A heavy black cloud hung right above him. It seemed like a downpour was about to begin any moment, but at this moment, Desmond felt that even if he got caught in a heavy rain and got soaked to the bone, nothing could ruin his mood. "Nicole, what do you think you're doing?" He was terribly embarrassed by his mistress's behavior. He wished he could sink into the ground. What did she think she was doing? Think of herself as a mistress. Understandable if his ex-wife, from whom Jason had separated about 5 years ago, had reacted this way, especially after the scandalous divorce. He wouldn't even allow her such liberties. "What do you think you're doing? You didn't even go on vacation, and you've quickly moved on to someone new. Don't even think about looking in her direction." Nicole took a pitcher from the table and poured herself some water. She took a sip and grimaced. "Doesn't she change the water at all? What does your secretary even do?" she asked. "Another outburst like that, and you'll be writing a resignation letter to HR," Jason said disapprovingly, taking a seat in his chair. He instinctively laced his fingers and leaned slightly forward. It felt like the calm before the storm. "I hope you understand me," he continued. "The next warning will be your last." "You mean?" She gestured towards the door. She simultaneously paled and blushed. Her face turned blotchy, her eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't dare ask any more questions. She understood she was wrong. Many times, she scolded herself for not being able to control herself and display her weakness in front of an adversary. She couldn't help but envy this accountant's self-control. That's who knew how to keep her emotions in check. Oh well, now she'd know not to cross her. "I want to warn you. If the question arises and one of you has to be let go, the choice will fall on you. So, if you ever feel like causing a scene out of nowhere again, Think twice beforehand. I'm tired of your hysterics, Jason said coldly. Nicole stormed out of the director's office. She condescendingly looked at the secretary. She wanted to reprimand her for the lukewarm water, but suspected that if she opened her mouth now, Maria would cry for half a day and then complain to Jason. She dashed into the corridor and stopped outside the chief accountant's office. After a brief hesitation, she raised her hand to knock, just to warn her again not to approach her man. But then she remembered how angry Jason had become. She decided to delay for a moment, assess the situation from a distance, and continue on her way. Desmond arrived home, turned on his phone, and listened to the recording. Just to be sure, he checked Michael's Instagram profile. This time, it was quiet. He thought about calling Valeria and telling her everything, but after looking at the time, he decided it was too late. No, he wouldn't discuss it over the phone. He'd rather plan another trip to Amsterdam for the weekend. Valeria finished work. It was raining outside. In this weather, the city turned into a giant traffic jam. She took out her umbrella, carefully avoiding puddles, and walked to the bus stop. Valeria, hop in, I'll give you a ride, she heard the director's voice, startled by the unexpected offer. At first, she thought she must have been mistaken, but upon turning around, she realized she wasn't. Thank you, Jason. Get in. Don't hesitate. We live in the same neighborhood. Valeria glanced at the bus leaving the stop. If Jason hadn't stopped her, she would now be sitting by the window, watching people take cover from the rain. Waiting for the next one in such weather wasn't very appealing. Jason got out of the car and opened the passenger door. Please. Valeria didn't resist much. Jason drove, his gaze fixed firmly on the road. No casual small talk. They spoke little and only about work. If you don't mind, I can give you a ride to work on Monday. I live nearby. It's a 20-minute drive, he offered, pulling over in front of her building. Upon hearing his words, she almost jumped. Why give people a reason to gossip? Neither Nicole nor my husband will like it, she replied, the first thing that came to mind. Jason subtly frowned, but he nodded in agreement. Agreed. Goodbye, Jason. Thanks for the ride. Catching his inquisitive gaze upon her, she chose to act as if she hadn't noticed anything. She exited the car, closed the door, and walked briskly toward her building, not looking back. What does he want from me? Doesn't he understand that I'm married and have no interest in the advances of other men? The last thing I need is for his Nicole to become jealous again, she thought as she hastily retrieved her intercom key. She recalled bumping into Nicole by the coffee machine the other day. She thought Nicole might accidentally spill her hot coffee on her, then reach out to help and pretend it was an accident. Thankfully, nothing happened, and she was relieved. She entered her home, and all thoughts of Jason immediately left her mind. Dana opened the door, and behind her stood a displeased Desmond. Mom, who gave you a ride? Two pairs of eyes looked at her questioningly, demanding an immediate answer. A colleague. He lives nearby. I missed the bus, and he happened to be passing by. He saw me and offered a ride. I didn't want to refuse, she explained. Valeria took off her coat, and Desmond carefully hung it on a hanger. There was a question nagging at the tip of his tongue. What are you doing here? No one invited you. But she decided to remain silent and proceeded to the bathroom. She washed her hands and looked at herself in the mirror. If Jason had been giving her a ride every morning, she'd have more time to make herself presentable. She could straighten her hair with a flat iron instead of tying it up in a convenient ponytail or bun, and she could add a bit of makeup. Valeria entered the kitchen, where Dana and her father were setting the table. Can I help you? Valeria said, feeling exhausted as she sat down on a chair. Dana silently brought a cutting board, bread, and a knife to the table. Cut the bread. We'll handle the rest, Desmond said. Desmond retrieved a bottle of wine from the fridge, while Dana placed 2 glasses on the table. She poured juice into a mug for herself and looked at her father, nodding subtly. Valeria, I saw Angelina again, he began grimly, leaning back in a kitchen nook. Why did you come here? Do you want to ask for my blessing? I'm not surprised at all. Be happy, Valeria replied with a wry smile. A long silence fell, and then it was as if he couldn't contain himself any longer. He started explaining how Angelina had come to their house in the evening, how he initially declined but then decided to use a voice recorder not to confess his love but to tell them that what they were doing was wrong. He played the recording, and their conversation was interrupted by a doorbell. Dana went to answer it and returned with a bouquet of flowers. "Mom, it's another delivery for you," she said, shrugging in surprise. She pulled a note from the bouquet and read it out loud. "Have a nice weekend. Valeria, can you explain to me what's happening? First, a colleague gives you a ride home from work. Then, someone brings flowers to your doorstep. I'm bending over backward to save our relationship, justifying myself all evening so that they'll have some mercy on me. And finally, they believe me. But it turns out you don't need any of that. If you found someone else, just tell me. I'll understand." Desmond stared intently, while Valeria wished she didn't have to explain anything to anyone and could simply turn away. But to do so or look the other way in a situation like this would mean admitting something she wasn't guilty of. "What do you want to hear from me? You see, I've come home. I haven't run away, like you did. Out of anger, I haven't jumped into someone else's bed, even though sometimes I want to get back at you. I do have my suspicions about the flowers, but I might be wrong," Valeria replied, with an astonished look on her face. Valeria spread her arms and shrugged. She glanced at her phone, which had just emitted a notification sound, then leaned over to read the message. Ignoring her husband's suspicious gaze, she set the phone aside. Desmond found Valeria's mood rather amusing. Let her experience the humiliation she had plunged him into. The intercom buzz interrupted their heart-to-heart conversation. His heart sank, anticipating an unpleasant encounter. His mother-in-law had left, and they hadn't shared their new address with anyone yet. "Mom, someone's here to see you," Dana called out. A lump formed in Valeria's throat, and she had grown cautious about unexpected visitors lately. "Mom, are you hearing me?" Her daughter's voice echoed again. "I'm coming." She approached the door, and there, leaning ostentatiously against the door frame, stood Nicole. "How can I help you?" Valeria asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Dana's phone rang, and she rushed to her room. Valeria followed her with her eyes, making sure her daughter had firmly closed her door, before turning her attention back to Nicole. There was something in Nicole's gaze that made Valeria feel weak and helpless. "And you have to ask," Nicole replied. Seeing Desmond exiting the kitchen, she abruptly fell silent and eyed him appraisingly. "Good evening. I'm Desmond, Valeria's husband," he courteously introduced himself. "Pleasure to meet you." "I'm Nicole," she said, as if in disbelief. "So, you're her husband. I heard rumors that you two were divorced, but that's not crucial. I've come to warn your wife to stop batting her eyelashes at my man." She decided to accuse Valeria of pursuing Jason, not realizing that Valeria had no interest in that at all. Instead of addressing her own relationship issues, Nicole chose the easy path of instilling fear in Valeria to eliminate her as a rival. "Nicole, leave. I have nothing with Jason, and there never will be. We only have strictly professional relations. Don't make up things that don't exist." "What are you saying, Valeria? Aren't you ashamed? I could understand if you weren't married. But how can you not be ashamed, with your husband alive?" Nicole continued, shaking her head. "Perhaps I'm just out of touch, and you have an open marriage. Otherwise, how can you explain your refusal to reject the director's advances, accepting bouquets, riding in his car? Keep in mind, I won't give you Jason. He's mine. We're going to have a child soon. You better focus on your husband and not interfere in other people's relationships. I warned you once, and today I'm giving you a second and final warning. There won't be a third. Have you said everything? Now listen to me carefully. You need to sort this out with your Jason, not with me. I don't ask for him to send me bouquets. I've told you multiple times that I'm married, and I don't need any extra attention. Today, I happened to miss my bus, and he was passing by and offered me a ride home. If you can't keep your man to yourself, that's not my problem. Now, get out of here. Go watch your Jason. Why should I be held accountable for his actions? Nicole, are you aware that he's married?" Nicole blushed, and a venomous smile appeared on her face. "Just because a husband is living with you doesn't mean much, does it?" Desmond grabbed Valeria by the waist, pulling her back to his chest and not allowing her to escape his iron grip. He planted a kiss on her head. "Nicole, please leave. It's not good that your family lacks trust. I, for one, trust my wife. I know she would never deceive me or have a relationship behind my back. I understand you're Jason. It's hard not to be attracted to a woman like my wife. But let this be clear. I won't give my wife to anyone, not even in his wildest dreams. Now, please exit. If I find out you're bothering my wife again, I'll have to deal with you. And I don't want to see you or your Jason near my wife anymore." Desmond pointed at the door. Nicole hurried into the corridor, slamming the door so hard that plaster fell from the wall inside the hallway. She shook her head and, without waiting for the elevator, confidently headed downstairs. "Thank you for standing up for me. I have nothing with the director. I'm not responsible for the attention he's giving me. It's true. I don't like this situation at all myself." Valeria bit her lip. "I believe you. Send me the director's phone number. I need to have a serious conversation with him." "Desmond, let's not get involved in our relationship with the director. You've already done all you could. Thanks to your intervention, I had to quit my favorite job and move to another city. Let's not keep ruining everything. After your conversation with Jason, I'll have to quit. And who will support my daughter and me? You." Valeria knew very well that in such circumstances, she wouldn't last long at her job. Quitting wasn't a problem, but where could she go? In the evenings, she looked through job listings on various websites, but nothing suitable came up yet. "Don't you understand? Nicole won't calm down until I quit. If I don't stop her in time, I can't even imagine how far she might go." "Valeria, don't worry. I'll do my best to keep things under control and ensure your reputation doesn't suffer. I'm warning you, I won't let this slide. If you don't give me his phone number, I'll go see Jason on Monday. Whether you want it or not, there will be a conversation between us." Unbeknownst to her, Desmond had taken the phone from her hands. Desmond leaned closer to Valeria, holding the phone in his hand, as if giving her one last chance to think it over. With a heavy sigh, Valeria dictated Jason's phone number. Jason opened the door immediately after the doorbell was pressed, as if he had been standing there waiting. He was dressed casually in shorts and a t-shirt, with a kitchen towel casually slung over his shoulder. "Good evening," Desmond said, observing the person he had learned to despise from a distance but was now willing to have a peaceful conversation with for Valeria's sake. "Come in," Jason said, stepping aside. "I'm Desmond, Valeria's husband," he introduced himself. "I'm Jason," Jason replied coldly, extending his hand for a handshake, though not immediately. "Please, come into the kitchen. I was just about to make coffee," he gestured with his hand. "Well, what do you want to talk to me about?" He walked over to the stove, lit the burner, and placed a coffee pot on it. "Don't you have an inkling?" Jason shrugged, turned around, feigning surprise on his face. "Let's start by addressing your bouquets. You, Jason, know very well that Valeria is married. I personally perceive this as a slap in my face. If you think you can get reciprocity from my wife, let me assure you that you're sorely mistaken. There's no need to act like the wounded husband. I did my research. I know that Valeria filed for divorce. She and your daughter left you in a hurry because you, Desmond, were having an affair with another woman. I'm sure your divorce is imminent because Valeria is unlikely to forgive you. I'm not married. I can afford to give bouquets to any attractive woman, especially since Valeria is in the process of getting a divorce. What about your Nicole? I think she suits you better. After all, she's expecting a child from you. Or have you reserved a role for her as your eternal mistress?" Jason took a bottle of cognac from the bar and silently placed 2 glasses on the table. He retrieved some cheese from the fridge and sliced it into thin pieces, casually dropping them onto a plate. "Would you like some cognac? I have a feeling our conversation will be a lengthy one, and coffee alone won't suffice. So, what were you saying about Nicole? Why don't I know anything about her pregnancy?" Desmond brought the glass to his lips, downing it in one go, and without a pause, continued. "Your lover is very impulsive. She controls your every move, and it's getting on my wife's nerves. She was at our house today, and you should have heard how she insulted my wife. Since you can't make her behave respectfully towards people, I had to take on this mission. I need to explain a few things, scold her a bit, and even give her a little scare. You've allowed her to become so unruly that she completely disregards basic decency. Desmond," he leaned in, "is it as if you and your lover have an agreement to intimidate Valeria out of her job? I looked at your Nicole today, and I was horrified. I'm not so much worried about your blatant flirting because I know Valeria, and I'm confident about how she handles herself. But honestly, I'm very concerned about my wife. If you're trying to drive her out, just say it straight. Valeria will understand." especially, as far as I know, she's reading the press and looking for a new job. Once she finds something suitable, she'll leave right away. Thank you for the warning. No one will bully Valeria anymore. I'll fire Nicole without any notice on Monday. And if, against my doubts, Valeria forgives you, and there's no divorce, then there won't be any more bouquets. There shouldn't be any bouquets at all. You never know what misunderstandings can arise in a family. Valeria is married. I'm warning you again, no bouquets. I hope we understand each other. Desmond rose from the table and headed toward the exit. After a few steps, he glanced back. A heavy silence hung in the air, which was broken by Jason's voice. I hear you. Did you call for me? Nicole entered Jason's office. Jason, reclining in his chair, watched as she slowly, swaying her hips, walked over to the table. Sign this, he said, casually tossing her the dismissal order without explaining the reasons. May I know the reason? She asked with surprise. I warned you to tone down your ardor. For the slow ones, I'll repeat. I won't allow anyone to mistreat my employees, Jason said, indifferently dropping a pen on the table. I had a conversation with Valeria's husband. Desmond asked me to tell you that he'd reduce you to dust if a single hair falls from his wife's head. I can promise the same from my end. If you get close to Valeria, I'll personally reduce you to dust. No reputable company will hire you, and if they do, I will put in maximum effort to get you fired. The only thing Jason could do in this situation was to press on her the fear of not finding another job. Shake her a bit, break her arrogance and self-confidence. I'm pregnant. You can't fire me. Of course, such an intimate conversation should take place in a different setting. At home, during a romantic dinner, perhaps with a glass of champagne. But you didn't leave me a choice. She leaned closer to him and whispered softly. Do you want more? A boy or a girl? Get up. We're going to the clinic right now. If you're really pregnant, we'll do a DNA test immediately. Jason, calm down. It's still early. It's too soon for a DNA test, she stuttered, grabbing his hands and looking deeply into his eyes. Don't worry. You shouldn't be upset. We'll figure something out, he responded tersely, releasing his hands and gritting his teeth. I'm angry. I don't believe it, but I'm nervous. I look at her and realize that there can't be anything between us. Never. That's it. Even if she does turn out to be pregnant, I won't be able to live with her. She's not the one I need. How soon are you? Don't make me use force, he said coldly as he turned, waiting by the door, indicating that there was no choice in the matter. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not pregnant. Are you happy now? Go and please your Valeria. What a fool she is. She had been taking birth control pills for over a year, wanting to live for herself. Jason had asked for a child, and she had been enjoying her life, feeling happier every day. She had postponed having a child until later, and when she finally wanted one, it didn't work out. Ignoring her growing hysteria, Jason asked the secretary to bring the new dismissal order. Is this all because of her? She asked before signing it. Jason remained silent. Even if it was true, he didn't owe her an explanation. My advice to you for the future: see a psychologist. Work on yourself. Work on your character. Try to be kinder. I'm tired of fighting with you. I'm tired of endless complaints about you. You're a wonderful woman, but your behavior is terrible. Nicole handed him the signed order. Satisfied, without answering her question, he opened the door. He gestured to the exit. He followed her to where he had been drawn all morning, to the chief accountant's office. Hello, Valeria. I came to tell you that just 10 minutes ago, Nicole submitted a resignation letter. Work peacefully. No one will bother you anymore. Desmond said you wanted to quit. He gazed at her, analyzing every movement. He approached carefully, so as not to startle her. He caught a whiff of her perfume. Everything about her seemed perfect. Even her hair, hastily pulled up into a bun, looked so golden and beautiful. I won't disturb you. Carry on with your work. Forget about the dismissal. I will never sign the resignation letter anyway, he said and left the office. He practically ran out, mentally stopping himself from staying. Maintaining a close and confidential relationship with a well-known lawyer for many years, Jason and Carl had involuntarily become good friends. Therefore, Carl was now not only listening to the case-related story but also asking other questions. We need to arrange for someone named Angelina to call my chief accountant and inform her that she's pregnant with her husband's child. Jason voiced his tarts, slicing into a juicy steak. Carl shook his head and leaned in his direction. That sounds intriguing, he said, playing with his knife, cutting off a piece and rolling his eyes in pleasure. He made a mental note to compliment the chef. Give me the contact details of this Angelina. We need to make sure she calls. There are many other options. We need to think about the best course of action. I understand that you're interested in this woman, but she's not available, right? Carl asked questions to which he himself didn't know the answers. But no matter what Carl asked, the answer was always the same: they must be separated. He might be acting unfairly, but he couldn't deny the necessity of it. Everyone has their own methods, and the one to blame, who doesn't even suspect that everything has already been decided for her. She will be his wife, and that's not up for discussion. It doesn't matter how the message gets through. The main thing is that Valeria unquestionably believes it. He responded to the questions after some consideration. Good morning, Jason. Carl's lively voice indicated that things were finally moving forward. Carl asked Jason not to call him anymore, to rely on his experience, and explained that he would have to endure some anxiety until everything became clearer. Hello, he answered with a smirk, marveling at his own composure. Now you can applaud. Everything worked out, just like in a cheap soap opera. He deliberately coughed, dismissing the sentimentality. He waited for Jason to stop stalling, but since he didn't, he continued. Desmond called a gynecologist, scolding him for Angelina missing her scheduled appointment. She wasn't answering his calls, and if she decided to get pregnant at her age, she needed to take better care of her health and follow the doctor's recommendations. She asked him to convey that she would be waiting for her at her office tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Carl fell silent. He paused for dramatic effect, as if admiring the work he had done. When there was no enthusiastic response, he continued, and in the adjacent office, another gynecologist is practicing. Who do you think it is? He asked, and, once again, not getting any reaction from his companion, he hastened to answer his own question. That's right. Valeria, a good friend of ours. Of course, in the most inappropriate moment, she was called to the scene. In the corridor, she met Desmond and Angelina. Naturally, after the doctor's call, Desmond couldn't reach Angelina and headed to her house. She greeted him, all green because she was suffering from morning sickness. She took a few days off from work due to her health. She didn't want to tell Desmond anything. She just gave the doctor, just in case, the father of the child's phone number. She was confident that the number would never be used by anyone. She initially wanted to continue with the pregnancy but decided to terminate it due to severe morning sickness. That's why she missed her scheduled appointment. Naturally, to make sure, Desmond went to the appointment with Angelina. And there, as I mentioned earlier, he ran into Valeria, a good friend of ours. You don't have to worry. We've got it all covered. Our friend read her medical record, where it's clearly written in black and white that Angelina is pregnant. As for the father of the child, that part is clear too. I doubt our friend will keep quiet for long. Well done. I like it. I probably would have believed it too. Thank you, Carl. From this pathological lie, on one hand, it was amusing, but on the other, it felt burdensome. However, he quickly collected himself, mentally persuading himself that Desmond was entirely to blame. Valeria deserved better, and if her husband had an affair on the side, he should face the consequences. So, I've filled you in on the situation. Your task now is to be there when needed. Well, I've got a client coming in. We'll talk later in the evening. Carl swiftly ended the call, and Jason unexpectedly burst into laughter, somewhat theatrically. Now he needed to gather the courage, come up with another excuse, and enter Valeria's office. But like a schoolboy, he didn't know how to do it. Taking a deep breath, he took the initiative and headed to a place he had been afraid to approach for several days. Hello, Valeria. He opened his mouth to ask a question, but as soon as he saw her pale face, he stopped immediately, as if he had hit the brakes, scared by her dejected expression. Valeria stared at him discontentedly, pursed her lips, and looked him up and down indifferently. Hello, Valeria. You don't look yourself. Something happened. She shook her head and opened her mouth to object. But Jason raised his hands in surrender. Don't try to deceive me. I can easily tell when you're in a good mood and when you're not. Approaching, He took a seat. Leaning forward, he rested his elbows on the table, supporting his chin with his hands, causing her some embarrassment while he observed her with genuine interest. "No, thank you for your concern. I'm fine. I just didn't sleep well last night. I have a headache." She smiled slowly, with no intention of confiding in anyone about her personal problems. "Maybe I should send you home today. We can get by for one day without our chief accountant. If something urgent comes up, I'll call you, or I can come over if necessary. If you don't mind, I'd like to take the day off today. I'm dealing with some minor troubles, and I have a terrible headache. I'm not going to be productive at work anyway." Valeria quickly powered down her computer, deciding to leave as quickly as possible before Jason started asking more uncomfortable questions that she wouldn't answer and that were none of his business. "I'll take you home. I'll be waiting in the parking lot." He turned around and quickly walked to the exit, ignoring her feeble attempts to decline. During the ride, Valeria managed to decline numerous incoming calls and eventually set her phone to silent mode, unable to answer any more calls. To her surprise, Jason remained silent throughout the journey, not pestering her with questions. Only when another call came in did he cast a sidelong glance, as if trying to figure out who was being so persistent and couldn't calm down. "Thank you," she expressed her gratitude when they arrived. In her mind, the same comforting thought flashed every second. Nothing terrible had happened. It was time to stop freaking out and put a big, bold line under this story. The event that had occurred was predictable and shouldn't be surprising. Children are often born from great love. That's what happened with Angelina and Desmond. Why did they have to make such a fuss and claim that nothing had ever happened between them? Let him live with whomever and whenever he pleases. Enough is enough. She was fed up with it. How much more could she take? Let them live happily. Just leave her in peace. Jason asked something, and she answered incoherently. Her brain wasn't working properly. All her thoughts were focused on speeding up the divorce and finally getting rid of her unfaithful husband. "Can I come by this evening?" Jason's voice barely registered. She raised her wary eyes, not even realizing who he was talking to. Jason repeated the question insistently. "Feel free." She shrugged and said the first thing that came to mind. She opened the door, thanked him for his support, and without saying goodbye, got out of the car. When Angelina met Carl at a cozy cafe not far from her home, she immediately realized that she had a rare chance, one that doesn't come around often. Fed up and having erased Desmond from her life, she decided never to humiliate herself in front of anyone ever again. She would respect herself, and if Desmond thought he'd be better off with Valeria, let him stay with her. She wouldn't chase after him, call him incessantly, or send endless messages. All his numerous declarations of love had proven to be false, empty words. But now, she had a real chance for revenge. To make Desmond regret trampling on her, treating her like dirt, and humiliating her in front of their son. Pretending to be pregnant turned out not to be that difficult. Carl took care of everything else. Convincing a talkative and interesting man like him to negotiate with a doctor wasn't hard at all. Angelina's task was to make sure she looked in such a way that Desmond wouldn't have any suspicions when he arrived. She had to clearly communicate that, despite the sex they had that night, she had felt sorry for him when she saw him so miserable and dejected in the morning. She had decided that there had been nothing between them. Angelina mentally rubbed her hands together. The moment of truth had arrived. Desmond would now pay for every tear shed, for every nerve racked, for the hurtful words that had echoed in her ears, reminding her over and over again of that fateful night. For Michael, for everything. Accidentally running into a familiar doctor at the clinic, Desmond panicked. He wanted to drop everything with Angelina and chase after her, explain that it was a regrettable misunderstanding. But as if sensing this, Angelina started complaining of dizziness. She almost started crying, saying that she couldn't bear it anymore. She clung to him as if he were a lifeline. He had to abandon his plan and escort her to the doctor's office. He walked in with her to the doctor's office. Angelina began speaking, almost in tears, about how she couldn't bear it anymore and had decided to have an abortion. She asked for a referral for tests. No longer willing to listen to their conversation, he simply walked out of the room, sat down on a chair, and contemplated that his marriage was probably over. Valeria might not have forgiven him even without this incident, but at least there had been a tiny glimmer of hope for redemption. How he had grown weary of all of this. Why had he even ventured into this damn clinic in the first place? Desmond called, messaged, and pleaded for a chance to explain. In his numerous messages, he shared his thoughts, suggesting that the child might not even be his, as if that would make everything much easier for her. Valeria simply didn't respond. What could you say to a person who had gotten himself into this mess? And she had almost believed him and even found herself thinking about forgiving past grievances and starting anew. Good evening. The ambulance has arrived. Hearing the doorbell, Valeria was greatly startled. She thought it was Desmond. She was ready to explain that he had come for no reason and no one wanted to see him. When she saw Jason, she was flustered. It seemed like the perfect time to be glad it wasn't her husband but just the director. But instead of joy, she felt noticeable unease. Why had he come? What did he want? Immersed in her problems, she completely forgot that he had promised to drop by after work. Seeing the bag of groceries in his hands, she was puzzled. She thought to herself, did he come here to eat? But with a forced smile, she said, please come in. Thank you for stopping by. Dana came out into the hallway and looked surprised at Jason, then shifted her gaze to the substantial bag he was carrying. She greeted him and, not wanting to interfere, went back into her room. I brought some fruits and a few groceries, Jason explained. Ignoring her sluggish appearance, he took off his shoes and headed to the kitchen. He washed his hands in the sink, opened the fridge, and began placing groceries inside. He asked for a cutting board, sliced smoked sausage, and cheese. He rinsed the fruits and prepared a fruit platter. Valeria tried to offer her help, but Jason insisted she sit down, saying she needed to rest more. How's your head? Is it better now? He asked with concern. Yes, it's better, Valeria replied, astonished by how skillful he was in the kitchen, effortlessly setting the table. Just to be safe, I stopped by the pharmacy. I bought some headache pills, he explained, realizing that arguing or declining was pointless. Valeria nodded silently. She felt a bit uncomfortable with his excessive care. It was as though she was a guest at his place, not in her own home. Jason placed a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the table. I bought it just in case, he said, pouring the wine and proposing a toast. Let's drink to never letting anyone upset us. He watched carefully to ensure Valeria took at least a sip before taking a couple himself. Valeria, you seem so sad. Maybe I should give you another day off. You haven't told me anything, but I can see that something has happened to you. If someone has hurt you, just tell me. Valeria waved her hand silently, not willing to draw his attention to this matter. He raised his glass again, smiling when Valeria raised hers without prompting. Just then, his phone rang again, and he noticed that her husband was calling once more. Valeria declined the call and set the phone aside to avoid any further interruptions. Troubles with your husband? Valeria, forgive me, but I always check for information about new employees through my channels. I know that you're going through a divorce and even the reason behind it. I'm sorry, it's just part of my job, he confessed apologetically. Seeing that Valeria was taking his words quite calmly, he continued, leave him. He's not worth all the pain and suffering you're going through. You're a beautiful, smart woman. You'll meet someone who will love and cherish you. For the first time that evening, Valeria smiled. It might have been dry, but it was open, honest, and sincere. Then the smile vanished from her face, and an inexplicable aloofness erected a wall between them once again. All right, I won't press you any further. If you don't want to talk, I won't insist. It's time for me to go home. He reluctantly rose. Gently, he tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was so tender that she momentarily closed her eyes in pleasure. She opened them only when she heard him say, so, are you taking another day off tomorrow? Or should I come by in the morning? A smile played on his face, and his voice sounded unusually gentle, kind, and entirely unfamiliar. It was the first time she had seen Jason like this. Come by, she said softly. At 8:30, be ready. I'll pick you up, he said. Having dropped Angelina off at her house, Desmond sat in the car, unable to figure out what to do next. The realization that he had indeed slept with Angelina on that fateful night hit him like a lightning bolt right on the top of his head. The emotional pain from this sudden blow intensified, becoming unbearable, seizing his thoughts and constricting his body. This couldn't be happening. A woman stopped near the entrance, took out her intercom keys, and opened the door. Desmond didn't even realize how he got out of the car. coming back to his senses only when he stumbled upon a suspicious look from the guardian of order. Squinting one eye, she pulled out a white handkerchief from her pocket and, not bothering to conceal her female curiosity, scrutinized him from head to toe. To avoid unnecessary questions, he decided to take the stairs to the 6th floor on foot. When he heard a familiar voice, he paused. Angelina was standing in the corridor between the 5th and 6th floors, looking out the window and speaking quietly to someone. "Carl, don't worry. We got away with it." Of course, he believed it. Don't worry. Desmond won't check anything. He was so scared when he bumped into his wife's friend in the corridor. He won't have time for this now. That's all for now. Understood. I'll text you as soon as I get it. Angelina ended the call and abruptly turned around, spotting Desmond. Without any embarrassment, she dryly remarked, "Have you been standing here for a long time? Weren't you taught that eavesdropping on other people's conversations is impolite?" "Who's Carl? I suppose that's your lover. What am I supposed to believe? I've noticed that your condition has improved dramatically. You couldn't stand on your own 2 feet, suffering from morning sickness. And now you're all bright and cheerful. Where did all of that go? I don't know why, but I don't believe you." Desmond approached her, snatched the phone from her hand, and threatened, "Either you tell me the truth right now, or I'll call your lover and find out everything from him." He turned on the phone, scrolled through her contacts. "No need to call anyone. What do you want? I told you I'll have an abortion. You can sleep soundly. There won't be a child." Angelina smirked, retrieved her phone, and tucked it away in her purse. She took her keys and began walking towards her apartment. "Why are you standing there? Go home. Or do you want to come in for a visit?" she said in a cheerful tone, as her phone pinged in her bag. Carl transferred the money for the job well done. Angelina struggled to hold back her laughter as Desmond stood still. He was so big and so naive, like a little mouse that had wandered into a trap, unaware that the cheese was placed there just for show. "Why don't I believe you?" he pondered, still hoping to get an emotional reaction out of her. "Maybe because you're jealous and can't forget," Angelina responded, lifting her chin high. "Don't flatter yourself," he retorted before heading downstairs. His intuition told him that Angelina was blatantly lying. The child wasn't his. But how could he prove it? More importantly, how could he get his wife to understand that he had once again been shamelessly slandered? What was he thinking when he rushed to that darn clinic? Another day passed. Valeria remained silent. Danny also didn't respond. Couldn't they just talk? He tried to reach out, bombarding them with messages and calls, but it was all in vain. Valeria was a modern, strong-willed woman with a firm character. It was undoubtedly a virtue, but in a family life, such a character should be used wisely and in small doses. It used to be like that before, but as soon as his wife left him and moved to Amsterdam, everything changed, and not for the better. Taking 3 days off, he flew back to Amsterdam. He didn't care about losing his job anymore. It couldn't get any worse. He needed to talk, explain that this was another setup. He didn't know what Angelina was trying to achieve, but he didn't believe a word she said. Upon arriving in Amsterdam, he took a taxi to the house. And what did he see? His wife was coming out of the building and got into Jason's car, taking the front seat. So, he picks her up every morning, and they go to work together. He couldn't take it anymore. He lost control, started cursing loudly in the back of the taxi. He was shouting like a madman, and then paid the bewildered taxi driver and stormed off to a place where they might not even let him in. On the way, he went through all possible scenarios in his head. How he would clear his name with his daughter. In the end, he wasn't guilty of Angelina naming him as the child's father. She could have put anyone's name. People have the right to do anything not prohibited by law, and there's no law against lying. "Daddy," Dana said disapprovingly. He collected his thoughts, preparing to come up with excuses, but he wasn't prepared for the contempt and disbelief in his daughter's eyes. Out of shame, he was ready to hide anywhere to avoid seeing those horrified eyes. "Sweetie, I'll explain everything. Please, don't push me away. I'm not at fault for anything. Come in. Mom is at work. I'm leaving for school now. You can stay here." She handed him her keys. Her gaze made his heart skip a beat. Nobody had ever looked at him like that before. It wasn't hatred. Dana seemed to be hurting too. She was empathizing with him. "Thank you, my daughter. I'll make use of the keys." I'm planning to have lunch with your mom today, he said out loud, but decided to himself. If she still doesn't want to talk to me, won't believe me, won't understand, then it's the final end. It means she found a place for someone else in her heart. It's disappointing and frustrating, but there's nothing you can do. You can't force love. You, Valeria retorted. Why did you come? We have nothing to talk about. Leave. Otherwise, I'll ask security to remove you from the building. Valeria spat out the hurtful words as if they automatically flew out of her mouth. It seemed like she didn't even have time to think about what she was saying, trying to hurt, offend, cause pain, and humiliate as much as possible. Desmond stood on the ground floor next to the security guard, waiting for Valeria and visibly nervous. However, what he saw exceeded all expectations. The situation was unpleasant. Ignoring the bystanders, his wife spoke in a low tone, with a tone as if she was suddenly seized by madness. It seemed like she might lunge at his face any moment. You're not answering calls. Instead of listening to me, you're driving around with your boss. I won't leave here until we talk. Let's go and have lunch. Enough of this silent treatment. Valeria glanced at her watch. Desmond noticed her perfectly manicured nails, even though they were dealing with such recent troubles. She stood there, all groomed, impeccably dressed, and well coiffed. It hurt his feelings. Fine. I'll go upstairs now and lock my office before coming down, she said with a displeased snort, as if she were doing him a favor, once again reminding him that the conversation was unnecessary and would lead to nothing good. They settled at a table by the window in a cafe not far from the office. Before leaving slightly earlier, Valeria had informed Jason that she might be a little delayed with lunch. Jason silently nodded. I'm listening carefully, Valeria said, taking the menu in her hands just to avoid looking at her husband. I understand you're upset with me. I don't even understand how I keep getting into trouble. But you don't even want to listen to me. He began to tell her how he received a call from the clinic, how Angelina didn't answer her phone. Then she pretended to be gravely ill. After a conversation with someone named Carl, she transformed before his eyes. From being sickly and weak, she instantly became healthy and fully capable. Carl, Valeria listened to him half-heartedly. Not that she wasn't interested, but too much had happened during this time. So much that it was physically impossible to remember all his blunders. She didn't have enough fingers to count them all, and the icing on the cake was the message that Desmond was going to be a father. The last piece of news had taken the ground from under her feet. After reading it, Valeria stood in a daze for several minutes, not comprehending what was happening. Both she and Dana had almost believed him, and it turned out that Desmond had been lying at every step. Hearing the familiar name, Valeria looked intrigued. Jason has a friend, a well-known lawyer in the city. Just recently, I signed a payment document. Jason transferred a large sum to his account. It could be a coincidence, of course. She bit her lip. She squinted, as if she were still mentally adding up the numbers. Do you mean that? Desmond turned his head. He met Jason's gaze. He was walking confidently toward them. We're about to ask him, Desmond said. Hello, Jason, Valeria said, mentally tensing up, while Desmond, rising from his chair, extended his hand to Jason. Jason stopped for a second but reluctantly shook it. Am I not interrupting? He looked at Valeria. Please, have a seat. Desmond gestured to the chair next to him. Jason, I understand that Carl did a great job with his task. You played it out perfectly. You just didn't consider one thing. Angelina was never good at keeping her mouth shut. Jason slowly smiled. When he walked into the cafe with determination, he was expecting a completely different conversation. He never expected Carl to backstab him at the most inconvenient moment. And how could he trust him after that? Jason, is this true? Valeria asked. Yes. Don't you think it's despicable? She asked the question again. I believe Desmond is not the right match for you. You deserve better. Why would you want that loser? He said out loud. Do you mean a scoundrel like yourself? Desmond grabbed him by the jacket collar and lifted him to his feet. I'll take care of you right here and right now. Let my wife see you like this, he threatened. Enough, Desmond, calm down. Valeria stepped in between them. Desmond lowered his hands. Jason adjusted his jacket and glanced at his watch. Valeria, right after lunch. I expect you in my office. Try not to be late, he said coldly and measured Desmond with a look. He smirked, buttoned his jacket, and left. Jason sat in his office, constantly checking his watch. Exactly 2 o'clock. If she didn't arrive in 3 minutes, he'd go back to that damned restaurant and get her out of there. However, right on the dot, the door opened. Valeria entered his office and placed a sheet of paper on his desk. "What's this?" he calmly asked. "It's my resignation letter." "Sign it." She handed him a pen. "I won't leave without your approval," she added, just in case. Jason signed his name and date. "It's a shame you never learned to judge people, Valeria," he said, handing her back her resignation letter. Jason could only stare at her back and wonder how this had happened. Just a couple of hours ago, he had been concerned about her well-being, celebrating that everything was going according to their plan, imagining the two of them having a party to celebrate the divorce. Then their closest friends would join them. He would get down on one knee and present the ring. "Valeria, have you thought this through?" He couldn't help himself. The question slipped out, and he would later regret it. Valeria paused for a moment. Jason hoped that she would at least turn around and they would look into each other's eyes. She was an intelligent woman and could figure it out on her own. But she didn't look back and left the office. "Well, nothing to worry about. We have 2 more weeks," he mumbled for self-comfort, hitting the table with his fist as hard as he could. "What a fool I am. Instead of winning the woman, I paid a hefty sum and did everything in my power to bring her and her husband closer together." Valeria came home to find Desmond in Dana's room. They seemed to be having an intense discussion or argument, filling the apartment with noise. They immediately fell silent when they heard the front door close. Like two impatient school children caught in the act, they rushed into the hallway. "Hello again. Dana and I are working on a paper," Desmond explained. Valeria undressed in silence, slipped her feet into her home slippers, and replied wearily, "Well done. How are you doing?" Desmond looked at her without averting his gaze, trying to gauge her mood. "I've written my resignation," she replied dryly. Desmond felt a rush of heat throughout his body at her words. He forced himself to focus on finding the right words. After all, it wasn't an easy task to convince his wife that he was willing to do anything for her. "Don't worry. We'll manage. My mom called today. I asked her to show our apartment to potential buyers. They seem to like it and promised to give it some thought by tomorrow. If anything, I'll transfer all the money to your account immediately. Buy whatever you want. I don't need anything. I'll stay at my mother's. She'll be more than happy." He cleared his throat and continued, "While I was waiting for you, I checked property prices. Selling our 3-bedroom apartment will be enough to buy a 2-bedroom one here. Maybe not in the city center or a brand new building, but it's a start." Dana hugged her father, rested her head on his shoulder, and fell silent. She occasionally let out sighs, like a young child who had just awakened from a terrible nightmare. "Thank you, Dad. Don't you want to move to Amsterdam?" She asked the question that had been on his mind, but he was afraid to say it out loud. "It all depends on your mom. I'd move in with you tomorrow if I could. I'll always find a job in my field. ID professionals are always in demand." A phone call interrupted their conversation. "Grandma's calling," he explained. "Okay, good. No, there won't be any discounts. That's the final price." "All right. I'll be in town on Monday." Desmond hung up and looked at Valeria. "They said they'll buy it. Just in case, we should start looking for an apartment for you." Valeria raised her eyebrows in surprise and skeptically asked, "Are you really willing to give us all the money for the apartment?" "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "It's hard to believe." "What if I can't forgive you?" "It doesn't matter." He grimaced and thoughtfully scratched behind his ear. "Of course, it would be nice if you could forgive me, but the decision is entirely up to you. I'll accept whatever you choose." "What about your first love?" "What love? What are you talking about? Don't remind me of her. I not only don't love her, I can't stand her. It's better to stay far away from a woman like her." "Mommy, maybe we should give Dad one more very tiny chance. He's going to help me with my school papers," Dana interjected, moved by her father's words. She anxiously looked at Valeria. "Let him first transfer the money for the apartment. Help us buy it and renovate it at his own expense. Then we'll see," Valeria firmly stated, enunciating each word, not entirely sure who she was trying to convince with her words. A year passed. Valeria quit her job. During the 2 long weeks of notice she worked, Jason, putting aside his pride, pleaded with her several times, but Valeria didn't yield to his pleas. She found a job close to home. Finally, she joined a team where everyone focused on their own tasks and didn't attempt to expose each other's dirty laundry or scrutinize every little flaw. Valeria and Dana bought an apartment. At first, Desmond visited them every weekend, as he promised, helping with renovations, coordinating with the builders, and being in constant communication with them. Eventually, he convinced Jennifer. They sold her apartment and moved together to Amsterdam, making it their permanent residence. Convincing Jennifer wasn't a lengthy process. She was delighted to live in the same city as her only granddaughter. She eagerly accepted the offer and didn't settle until she moved to Amsterdam. Valeria opened the door to find Desmond standing there, with 2 large suitcases next to him. "Where are you going?" she asked, although she understood everything perfectly well. She had considered offering him to move in permanently several times, but kept postponing this difficult conversation. "I've decided that life with you will be much better. Will you let me in? I've fulfilled all your conditions. You promised to think about it. I'm tired of waiting for you to invite me. I can't be without you," he said in one breath, as if he feared he wouldn't be accepted. Valeria smirked, stepped aside, and opened the door wider, just to be safe. "Come in," she said, not wanting to prolong the matter. Desmond quickly brought the suitcases into the house and closed the door behind him. "I hope you'll help me unpack. And when Dana gets back from school, we'll surprise her that we're going to live together again." "Aren't you bothered by the fact that we're divorced?" Valeria asked. He took a small red box out of his pocket. "Marry me. I talked to Dana, and she's fine with it. We picked out the ring together. I'll think about it. Let it stay with you for now, until better times," Valeria said. She didn't rush into it. It was only a year later that Valeria and Desmond quietly got married, celebrating the event within their close family circle. Neither Angelina nor Jason